This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still have trouble talking about what happened that night. Even now, 15 years later, I break out in a cold sweat just thinking about it. But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. It was December 12th, 2008. I remember the date because it was exactly 13 days before Christmas, and I'd just finished putting up some decorations in my bedroom. My mom worked night shifts at the hospital in Fairview, small town in Wisconsin where we lived, so I was alone in the house. Nothing unusual about that. I was 17 and used to being by myself. Around 8:30 that night, I was upstairs in my room playing Xbox. It was snowing outside, one of those heavy Wisconsin snowfalls that muffles everything. The house was quiet except for the game sounds. I had school the next day, so I was planning to wrap up soon and get some sleep. That's when I heard it, a heavy thump from downstairs, like someone wearing boots had stomped on our hardwood floor. At first, I paused the game and listened. Nothing. I figured it was just the house settling. You know how old houses make weird noises sometimes. Ours was built in the 1960s, so creaks and groans weren't uncommon. But then it happened again. Thump. Louder this time. Deliberate. My heart started racing. I told myself it was probably just the radiator or something. Maybe the cat had knocked something over, except we didn't have a cat. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound had been too distinct. I unpaused my game, trying to ignore it, when the thumping started again. Not just once, but a series of heavy footsteps moving across the downstairs floor. It sounded exactly like someone walking around down there. My mouth went dry. I lived in the middle of nowhere. Our closest neighbor, my friend Michael, lived about 5 minutes away by foot. Mom wouldn't be home until 7 in the morning. I was completely alone. I grabbed my phone, ready to call someone, when the power flickered. The TV screen went black for a second, then came back on. Then it happened again and again. The lights in my room started doing the same thing. On, off, on, off. Then I heard the sound of cupboards opening and closing downstairs. Not just one, but all of them, like someone was going through every single one in a frenzy. Dishes clattered, something shattered. I sat frozen on my bed, clutching my phone, trying to decide what to do. Call the police? But what would I say? That my lights were flickering and I heard noises. They'd take forever to get out to our place anyway. The rational part of my brain was saying it had to be an intruder, some meth head looking for stuff to steal maybe. But another part of me knew this was something else, something worse. I don't know where I found the courage, but I decided to check it out. Stupid, I know, but I thought if I could just see what it was, I could figure out what to do. I grabbed my baseball bat from beside my bed and crept to the top of the stairs. The hallway light was the only one not flickering. Everything else in the house was blinking like crazy. As I stood at the top of the stairs, I could see into the kitchen. What I saw makes me sick to my stomach even now. Every single cabinet door was opening and closing by itself, not just a little. They were slamming open and shut, over and over. Plates, glasses, and silverware were flying across the room, smashing against walls. The refrigerator door was swinging wildly. The kitchen table was sliding back and forth across the floor like it was being pushed by invisible hands. I nearly pissed myself right there. This wasn't a burglar. This was something else. I should have run then, should have gotten the hell out of that house. But I was frozen, watching in horror as my kitchen destroyed itself. Then everything suddenly stopped. The cabinets closed. The flickering lights steadied. Dead silence. That's when I saw it. Standing in the corner of the kitchen was a figure, not a person, at least not like any person I've ever seen. It was completely black, like a hole cut into reality. It had no features except for 2 glowing red eyes, not red like bloodshot, but red like burning coals. They weren't just reflecting light, they were emitting it, casting a dim reddish glow on the floor around the figure. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think. Those eyes were looking right at me. and I felt something I can't even describe. Like all the happiness had been sucked out of the world. The figure started to move. It didn't walk. It glided like its feet weren't touching the ground, coming toward the stairs, coming toward me. I was still frozen, gripping the baseball bat so hard my knuckles were white. The thing moved slowly, deliberately, those red eyes never blinking, never looking away from me. When it reached the bottom of the stairs, something in my brain finally screamed, "Move!" and I snapped out of it. I dropped the bat and ran to my room, slamming the door and pushing my dresser in front of it. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial Michael's number. No answer. Shit. Shit. I looked out my window. The snow was coming down hard, but I could see Michael's house lights in the distance. I had to get out of there. I heard the stairs creaking. Whatever that thing was, it was coming up. I didn't even think. I opened my window, climbed out onto the roof over our porch, and jumped into a snowbank. I didn't feel the cold or pain. I just ran. Barefoot, in pajama pants and a t-shirt, in the middle of a December snowstorm, I ran through the woods toward Michael's house. I couldn't feel my feet. The snow was up to my shins, but I didn't slow down. I kept looking back, terrified I'd see those red eyes following me. The whole time I ran, I had this overwhelming feeling of being watched, of something right behind me. When I finally burst out of the trees near Michael's house, I was gasping for breath, my lungs burning from the cold air. I pounded on their door like a maniac until his mom answered. I've been told what happened next because honestly, I don't remember much of it. Michael said I was standing there with blue lips, no shoes, snow all over me, and a look on my face like I'd seen someone murdered. I couldn't speak. I just stood there shaking and crying. They pulled me inside, wrapped me in blankets, but I couldn't stop shivering or crying. It took maybe 20 minutes before I could form words, and even then I couldn't explain what happened. Every time I tried, I'd start hyperventilating. That's when their phone rang. Michael's mom answered it. Her face changed as she listened. She asked who was calling, but there was no response. She put it on speaker and we all heard it. Heavy breathing. Not like someone was out of breath, but deliberate, rhythmic. It went on for maybe 20 seconds. Then the line went dead. Michael's dad checked the caller ID. It was from my house, my empty house. I lost it then. Complete breakdown. They wanted to call the police, but I begged them not to. I couldn't explain why. I just knew deep down that cops wouldn't help with whatever this was. I stayed at Michael's that night. His parents called my mom at work, told her I'd had some kind of panic attack and was staying over. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those red ones staring back at me. The next morning, Michael's dad drove us to my house. Mom was already home, confused and worried. The place was a disaster, exactly as I'd seen it. Knives and forks scattered across the floor, cupboards standing open, chairs knocked over, things moved from where they should be. I told them someone had broken in. What else could I say? They wouldn't have believed the truth. Hell, I barely believed it myself. The police came, looked around, found no signs of forced entry. They said it was probably local kids, maybe someone who knew I was alone. They took a report and left. Mom and I stayed in the house. I didn't want to, but where else could we go? I slept in her room for a week after that. Things were quiet for a while, but there was always a feeling of wrongness in that house, like something was waiting. 3 months later, Mom was pushed down the stairs by what she described as a sudden gust of wind inside the house. Broke her arm in 2 places. That was it for us. We moved out the next week, leaving most of our stuff behind. Since then, I've kept tabs on the place. 4 different families have lived there. None stayed longer than 3 years. The last family moved out in 2019, and as far as I know, the house has been empty since. I still don't know what that thing was. I've researched demons, ghosts, all kinds of paranormal stuff, but nothing quite matches what I experienced. The closest thing I've found is descriptions of shadow people, but even those don't usually have those burning red eyes. I never went back inside that house. Never will. Sometimes I drive by when I visit Fairview, and I swear I can feel it watching me from the windows, waiting. Story 2. I've never been someone who believes in ghosts or the supernatural. At least I didn't used to be. But something happened to me a few years back that I still can't explain, and I find myself thinking about it all the time. I figured I'd finally share it here because I need to tell someone who might understand. It's been about 5 years since that day, but the experience is still so vivid in my mind. My dad had passed away 12 years earlier after a brutal 10-year battle with Parkinson's. If you've never watched someone go through that, count yourself lucky. It's a special kind of hell watching someone who was once so strong and capable slowly lose control of their own body. By the end, he couldn't even hold a spoon steady enough to feed himself. My dad grew up in rural Pennsylvania on this massive 200-acre property that my grandparents owned. The place was mostly woods, with a small clearing where their house sat. As a kid, he spent basically every waking moment exploring those woods, building forts, and dreaming about one day building his own house there. He would tell me stories about how he and his brothers would spend entire summers just living in those woods, only coming back to the house for meals. When I was growing up, we lived about 3 hours away in a suburb, but we'd visit my grandparents pretty regularly. Every time we went, Dad would take me on these long walks through the property, showing me all his favorite spots from childhood. There was this one clearing that he absolutely loved. It was on a little rise that overlooked a small stream. When I was about 13, he took me there and told me, "This is where I'm going to build my house someday." I remember being kind of confused at the time because we already had a house, but he explained that this was his dream, to come back to where he grew up and build something with his own hands. He wanted to retire there, to spend his final years in the place that made him happiest as a kid. In his early 40s, Dad actually started making moves to make this dream happen. He began collecting building materials, really nice hardwoods that he'd find for good prices, some beautiful stained glass windows from an old church that was being demolished, handmade doorknobs and fixtures he'd pick up at flea markets. He stored it all in our garage at first, but eventually there was just too much stuff. So one summer when I was about 17, he and I drove up to my grandparents' place and spent 2 weeks building this massive open-air shed on the property, right near the clearing where he wanted to build the house. It was basically just a roof with support beams and a concrete floor, but it was big enough to store all the materials he'd been collecting. I remember him being so excited as we worked on it, talking about how the shed was just the first step, and soon we'd be starting on the actual house. But then life happened, I guess. I went off to college, Dad got busier at work, and the house project kind of stalled out. He'd still add to his collection of materials whenever he found something special, and occasionally we'd drive up to check on the shed and make sure everything was still in good shape, but actual construction never started. Then when I was in my junior year of college, Dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's. He was only 47. At first it wasn't too bad, just a slight tremor in his right hand that he tried to joke about. But over the years it got worse and worse. The dream house became something we didn't talk about anymore. It was this unspoken thing hanging between us, this future that was slipping away as his body betrayed him more and more each day. By the time I graduated and got my first job, Dad was using a walker. A few years after that, he was in a wheelchair. The last 2 years, he was basically bedridden. My mom became his full-time caregiver, and I would drive home every weekend to help out and give her a break. The strong, capable man who had taught me how to build a shed and swing a hammer could barely lift a glass of water to his lips. When he finally passed, it was almost a relief, not for us, but for him. He hated being trapped in a body that wouldn't do what he wanted it to. The funeral was held near my grandparents' place, in the small town where he grew up. A lot of his childhood friends came, people I'd never even met before. They all had these amazing stories about my dad as a kid, how fearless he was, how he was always the one climbing the highest tree or jumping into the deepest part of the swimming hole. After the funeral and the reception, everyone went back to my grandparents' house. It was packed with people, and I was feeling pretty overwhelmed. I needed some air, some space to process everything. So I slipped out the back door and started walking through the property. I didn't really have a destination in mind, but somehow my feet carried me toward that shed we had built all those years ago. I hadn't been there in probably 8 or 9 years at that point. As I walked, I kept thinking about all those dreams Dad had that never came true, all those materials we had collected for a house that would never be built. It was early October, one of those perfect fall days where the air is crisp but not cold. The leaves were just starting to change, with patches of red and gold scattered among the green. The path to the shed was overgrown. Clearly no one had been using it much since Dad got sick. I had to push through some brush, and by the time I reached the clearing, my black suit pants were covered in burrs and little sticky seeds. The shed was still standing, though it looked weathered and sad. The roof had a slight sag to it, and some of the support beams had rotted at the bottom. I walked up to it slowly, not really sure what I was expecting to find. Inside, all of Dad's materials were still there, covered with tarps that were now faded and fraying at the edges. I pulled one back and saw the pile of cherry wood he'd been so proud of finding at an auction. It was still in good shape, protected from the elements. I spent maybe 20 minutes just walking around the shed, uncovering different materials and remembering the stories behind them. This piece came from an old barn that was being torn down. That stained glass window was from the church where my parents got married. These brass fixtures were from some fancy hotel in Pittsburgh that was being renovated. Each item was a piece of a dream that would never come true, and it hit me harder than I expected. I sat down on a stack of lumber and just cried for a while. Not the quiet, dignified tears I'd managed at the funeral, but ugly, heaving sobs that left me gasping for breath. I cried for my dad, for all his lost dreams, for the years of suffering he'd endured, for the house that would never be built. When I finally pulled myself together, I covered everything back up as best I could and decided to head back to my grandparents' house. I was emotionally drained and physically exhausted. All I wanted was to go back, make my excuses, and find a quiet corner to sleep in. I had walked maybe 50 yards from the shed when it happened. One moment, I was just trudging along, eyes on the ground, mind a million miles away. The next, I was suddenly hit with the overwhelming smell of unfired gunpowder. It stopped me in my tracks. The scent was so strong and so specific that I actually looked around, confused about where it could be coming from. There was no one else around. I was completely alone in the woods, and then I realized why that smell was so familiar and why it had such a powerful effect on me. My dad used to reload his own shotgun shells when I was a kid. He was an avid hunter, and he had this little setup in our basement where he'd carefully measure out the powder, prime the shells, and pack them. I used to stand next to him and watch the whole process, fascinated. That distinctive smell of unfired gunpowder was something I associated completely with my dad and those quiet moments we'd spend together in the basement. The scent was exactly the same, not similar, not reminiscent of, but exactly the same smell I remembered from all those years ago. It was as if I was standing right next to him at his reloading bench, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the smell was gone. Completely gone. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like forever. I breathed in deeply through my nose, trying to catch even the faintest trace of it, but there was nothing, just the normal smells of the woods in autumn. I'm not a spiritual person. I don't believe in much of anything that I can't see or touch. But in that moment, I absolutely knew that my dad had been there with me. He hadn't appeared as some ghostly figure or spoken to me or anything dramatic like that. Just that smell, that one specific smell that was so uniquely him, so tied to memories of him at his workbench, doing something he loved. It lasted maybe 5 seconds total, but those 5 seconds changed something fundamental in how I see the world. I've gone back to that spot a few times since then, hoping to experience it again, but I never have. That one brief moment of connection is all I got. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it, if grief and exhaustion made me hallucinate something that wasn't there. But deep down, I know what I experienced. I don't have any grand conclusions or life lessons to share from this. I still don't know what happens after we die, or if our loved ones can really reach out to us from wherever they are. All I know is that for a few brief seconds on that October afternoon, the barrier between this world and whatever comes next seemed to thin just enough for my dad to let me know he was there. And sometimes that's enough to keep me going. Story 3. I still can't explain what happened that night 6 years ago. I've spent countless hours going over every detail, trying to make sense of it, but I just can't. None of us can. It was a typical Friday night in Plovdiv. I was 20 years old, enjoying life with my group of friends in Bulgaria's ancient city. We'd been at this new club that had just opened near the Roman amphitheater. I can't even remember its name now. What I do remember is that we drank a lot. Rakia, beer, some questionable shots that Georgi kept buying. We were properly wasted by the time we decided to head home. There were 7 of us walking back to my apartment around 3 in the morning. Me, Victor, Nikolai, Georgi, Stefan, Maria, Anna, and Dimitar. The streets were mostly empty, with just a few late-night stragglers like ourselves. It was early September, still warm enough to be out in just t-shirts, but with that slight chill that creeps in during the early hours. We were laughing, pushing each other around, singing some stupid pop song that had been playing all night at the club. You know how it is when you're drunk with friends. Everything is hilarious and you feel invincible. We decided to take a shortcut through the underpass near the railway station. During the day, it's busy with commuters, but at night, it becomes this eerie, echo-filled tunnel that smells of piss and cigarettes. As we descended the stairs into the underpass, our voices bounced off the tiled walls. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting weird shadows. About halfway through, we spotted her. An old woman, really old. She was hunched over, leaning on a wooden cane with one hand and gripping the handle of this enormous shopping cart with the other. And when I say enormous, I mean it was unusually large, like someone had custom built it. It had wheels, but she was struggling to drag it along. She heard us approaching and turned. Her face is burned into my memory, deeply wrinkled, with this intensity in her eyes that made me instantly uncomfortable. She wore a dark headscarf and layers of clothing despite the season, all in shades of brown and black. "Excuse me," she called out in Bulgarian, her voice surprisingly strong. "Could you young people help me? I need to get this up the stairs. The escalators and elevators aren't working again." I was in front of our group, and I don't know why, but something about her made me want to keep walking. Maybe it was how she appeared out of nowhere, or the way she stared at us, or just drunk paranoia. "Sorry, we're in a hurry," I slurred, not even stopping. I just wanted to get past her and out of that underpass. My friends followed my lead and we continued walking. But after about 10 steps, this overwhelming feeling came over me. It wasn't just guilt, it was dread, like I'd done something terrible that would come back to haunt me. It made my skin crawl. I stopped and turned back. "Actually, we can help you," I called out. The old woman hadn't moved. She was still standing there, watching us, as if she knew I'd changed my mind. "You already made your choice," she said flatly. That should have been the end of it. I should have just kept walking, but I insisted, "No, really, we can help. There's 7 of us. It'll be easy." She studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well." As we approached her cart, I got a better look at what was inside. It was filled with plants and herbs, stems, leaves, roots, all bundled together with twine. Some I recognized, like lavender and rosemary, but others I'd never seen before. The smell was intense, earthy and sweet and somewhat medicinal. "I've been collecting all day," she explained as Nikolai, Georgi, Stefan and I positioned ourselves around the cart. "I need to catch my train soon." The moment we tried to lift it, we realized something was off. The cart was impossibly heavy. I mean, herbs and plants shouldn't weigh that much. It took all 4 of us, straining with everything we had, to get it moving. Meanwhile, Maria and Anna helped support the old woman, who moved slowly with her cane. As we struggled up the stairs, sweat pouring down my face despite the cool air, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Who collects herbs at night? Why was her cart so heavy? And there was something about her eyes, the way they seemed to see right through me. "You're a kind boy after all," she said to me as we reached the top of the stairs, "despite your first instinct." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded, trying to catch my breath. The railway station was mostly deserted at this hour, just a few homeless people sleeping on benches and a couple of security guards patrolling. "Where's your train?" Dimitar asked, looking around at the empty platforms. "It will be here," she said confidently. "Now for your help, I would like to give you something." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small cloth bag tied with string. "No, really, it's fine," I said quickly. I didn't want anything from her. By this point, I was thoroughly creeped out and just wanted to leave. "Are you sure?" she asked, her eyes fixed on mine. "It's just a small token of appreciation. Some herbs for tea. They help with dreams." "We're good, thank you." Maria jumped in, clearly sensing my discomfort. The old woman shrugged and put the bag back in her pocket. "As you wish. Thank you for your help. Enjoy the rest of your night." We said awkward goodbyes and practically ran away from the station. Once we were out of earshot, Georgie grabbed my arm. "That was a fucking witch, man," he hissed. "Don't be stupid," Anna said, but her voice shook slightly. "Did you feel how heavy that cart was?" Stefan added. "No way that was just plants." "Maybe she had rocks or something at the bottom," Maria suggested, always the rational one. "But why would an old woman be collecting herbs at night?" Nikolai asked. "And why was she taking a train at 3 in the morning?" We debated this all the way back to my apartment. By the time we arrived, it was around 4 in the morning. My place wasn't big, just a small 2-bedroom in an old Soviet-era building where mostly elderly people lived. We were all planning to crash there, as we often did after nights out. We had some water, used the bathroom in turns, and settled in wherever we could find space, some on the couch, others on the floor with blankets and pillows. Despite how drunk and tired I was, I couldn't fall asleep right away. My mind kept replaying the encounter with the old woman. There was something about her that just felt ancient. Not just elderly, but old, in a way that went beyond years. I must have eventually drifted off because what happened next occurred in that strange space between wakefulness and sleep. You know that state where you're not sure if something is really happening or if you're dreaming? I became aware of sounds coming from outside my apartment. Music, laughter, glasses clinking. It sounded like a party, and not just a small gathering, but something extravagant. This made no sense. As I mentioned, my building was mostly occupied by elderly residents who were typically in bed by 9. Parties didn't happen here. I checked my phone. It was 5:30 in the morning. Who throws a party at that hour? I considered getting up to investigate, but my body felt incredibly heavy, like I was pinned to the mattress. The music grew louder, and I could now make out voices speaking in a language I couldn't identify. It wasn't Bulgarian or English or any language I recognized. Then came the smell. Herbs, just like the ones in the old woman's cart, but stronger, mixed with something burning. It seeped under my door, filling my room. I tried to wake Nikolai, who was sleeping on the floor beside my bed, but I couldn't move or speak. I was completely paralyzed, trapped in my own body while fully conscious. What happened next is where things get really weird, and I still don't know if it was a dream or something else. I suddenly felt like I was at the party. I wasn't physically there, my body was still in bed, but I could see everything. It was happening in the hallway of my floor, but the hallway had somehow expanded, becoming a vast space filled with people. But these weren't normal people. They were dressed in outdated clothes from different periods, some in attire that looked medieval, others in early 20th century garb. Many were elderly, but not all. They danced in circles around tables laden with strange foods and beverages that glowed with unnatural colors. And there she was, the old woman from the underpass, but transformed. She stood straighter, without her cane, and her face, while still elderly, had a vitality to it that wasn't present before. She moved through the crowd, greeting people, and everyone seemed to defer to her. She spotted me, or my presence, or whatever I was in this state, and smiled. Not a warm smile, but knowing, almost triumphant. She raised a cup in my direction, and everyone at the party turned to look at me. Their eyes weren't right. They reflected light like animals' eyes do in the dark. I tried to retreat, to pull myself back to my body, and suddenly I was gasping awake in my bed, covered in sweat. Sunlight was streaming through my window. It was morning, just past 11 according to my phone. I sat up, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had I dreamed the whole thing? The party, the people, the old woman, it had felt so real. Nikolai stirred on the floor beside me, groaning and holding his head. "Fuck. I'm never drinking again," he mumbled. "Did you hear anything strange last night?" I asked hesitantly. He looked at me oddly. "You mean the party?" "Yeah, it was loud as hell. I thought your building had strict rules about noise." My blood ran cold. "You heard it too?" "Of course, how could I not? But the weirdest part was the dream." "What dream?" I asked, my mouth dry. "I dreamed I was at the party, but it wasn't normal. The people were different." He shook his head. "It was just a nightmare from drinking too much, I guess." Throughout the morning, as everyone woke up with hangovers, a disturbing pattern emerged. All 7 of us had heard the party. All 7 of us had experienced the same dream of attending it while being unable to move our bodies. We all saw the old woman from the underpass, transformed and at the center of everything. But when we checked with the neighbors, no one had heard anything. No party had occurred. The hallway showed no signs of the elaborate gathering we'd all witnessed in our minds. We spent hours that day trying to rationalize what happened. Carbon monoxide poisoning, some kind of mass hallucination triggered by something we drank at the club, or had the old woman, the witch, as Georgie insisted on calling her, somehow done something to us. 6 years have passed since that night. We've all moved on with our lives in different ways. Some of us left Plovdiv, some stayed, but we still talk about it when we get together. None of us can explain what happened. We've researched folklore about witches in Bulgarian tradition, looked into sleep paralysis and shared psychotic disorders, but nothing quite matches our experience. Sometimes I take that same route through the underpass, always during daylight hours, half expecting to see her again. I never have. But occasionally, walking through the city at night, I'll catch a whiff of those herbs and my blood runs cold. To this day, I don't know what we encountered in that underpass. Was she human? Was the party real on some level we couldn't understand? All I know is that 7 people experienced the exact same impossible thing, and none of us have been able to explain it. Whatever she was, whatever happened that night, it wasn't natural. And sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if she's still out there collecting her herbs and asking strangers for help. Story 4. I still get goosebumps typing this out. I've never told anyone about this before, not even my closest friends or family. Partly because I'm afraid they'll think I'm crazy, but mostly because putting it into words makes it more real somehow. But I need to tell someone because it's happening more frequently now and I don't know what to do. It all started back in late 2020, during those weird pandemic months when everything felt off-kilter anyway. I was a third-year university student, living in this tiny house with 3 housemates about a mile from campus. The place was nothing special. Cramped kitchen, living room barely big enough for a small couch and TV, and bedrooms that could fit a bed and not much else. That particular night, my housemates had gone to some secret party. You know, the kind everyone pretended wasn't happening during lockdown. I'd stayed home because I had an assignment due, plus I was actually trying to follow the rules. The house felt empty, but peaceful. I remember sitting cross-legged on my bed with my laptop, fighting to keep my eyes open as I finished my paper. It was around 11:30 at night when I finally submitted it. I shut my laptop, stretched, and was about to get ready for bed when I noticed something weird. The house was completely silent, and I don't just mean quiet, I mean a total absence of sound. No humming from the refrigerator, no distant traffic, no creaking from the old house settling, nothing. It was like someone had hit mute on the entire world. I remember thinking it was strange but didn't dwell on it too much. I was exhausted. I got up to turn off my bedroom light before going to sleep. I flicked the switch, plunging the room into darkness, and turned around to head back to my bed. That's when I saw her, sitting exactly where I had been, on my bed. A woman in a yellow sundress, with a paper bag over her head. She was just sitting there, perfectly still, facing forward like a mannequin. The bag was one of those brown paper grocery bags, completely covering her head. No eye holes, nothing, just a blank paper bag. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My hand was still on the light switch, and somehow through my panic, I managed to flick it back on, and she was gone, just like that. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of my room with all the lights on until my housemates came back at around 3 in the morning. I made up some excuse about being sick and asked one of them to stay up with me for a bit. I never told them what I'd seen. I convinced myself it was just exhaustion, stress from school and the pandemic. Maybe I'd fallen asleep without realizing and dreamed the whole thing. That explanation worked for about a week until it happened again. This time I was in the kitchen making a sandwich. That same unnatural silence descended, like someone had sucked all the ambient noise out of the world. When I turned around to grab something from the fridge, she was standing in the corner of the kitchen, facing the wall. Same yellow sundress, same paper bag, just standing there, completely motionless. I dropped my plate, and the crash seemed deafening in that silence. When I looked back, she was gone. After that, she started appearing more regularly, always preceded by that absolute silence. Sometimes weeks would pass without an appearance. Then I'd have 3 visits in a single week. There was no pattern I could discern. I called her Baghead in my head. Not very creative, I know, but giving her a name somehow made it less terrifying, made her seem more like a weird roommate who didn't respect boundaries rather than whatever the hell she actually was. She never did anything threatening, never moved toward me, never made a sound, just appeared in different places around the house, sometimes sitting on furniture, sometimes standing in corners facing the wall, once, horrifyingly, sitting at the foot of my bed while I was half asleep. That time I screamed and fumbled for the lamp. When the light came on, she was gone, but my housemate came running to check on me. I blamed it on a nightmare. I started leaving lights on all the time. My housemates complained about the electricity bill, but I didn't care. I noticed she never appeared in well-lit rooms, only in darkness or dim light. And she always vanished when I turned on a light. I tried researching what could be happening to me. Sleep paralysis? But I was fully awake and mobile during these encounters. Hallucinations? Maybe, but they were so consistent, so specific. And that silence that preceded her appearances, it wasn't just in my head. I could tell the actual ambient noise of the house disappeared. I thought about telling someone, maybe a doctor or a therapist. But what would I say? Hey, I keep seeing a woman with a paper bag on her head who disappears when I turn on the lights. I'd be put on antipsychotics faster than I could say, I'm not crazy. The fear I feel when she appears is unlike anything I've ever experienced, and I've been in genuinely life-threatening situations before. Once, during a gap year before university, I was hiking in Bangladesh and accidentally got between a mother tiger and her cubs. I could see the tiger watching me, deciding whether to charge. My guide slowly moved us away, but for those few minutes, I thought I was going to die. This is worse. This fear goes deeper than survival instinct. It's primordial, like my soul recognizes something fundamentally wrong about Baghead's existence. What scares me most is that she's never, not once, turned to face me directly. She's always either facing away or sitting at an angle. I don't know why, but I'm terrified of the day she might turn around. I don't want to know what's under that bag, or if there's anything under it at all. After I graduated, I moved to a different city for a job. I thought maybe Baghead was somehow tied to that house, that she wouldn't follow me. For a few blessed months, that seemed true. No visits, no unnatural silence. Then one night in my new apartment, while I was getting a glass of water at 2 in the morning, the world went silent. I knew before I turned around that she'd be there, standing in the hallway, facing the wall, paper bag motionless over her head. I've moved twice since then. She always finds me. I tried everything, salt lines at the doors and windows. I read somewhere that keeps spirits out. Religious symbols, sage burning. Nothing worked. I even went to see a medium once, but I chickened out at the last minute and didn't mention Baghead, just asked general questions about negative energies. The medium said she didn't sense anything unusual around me, which was both a relief and more terrifying somehow. Last year, things escalated. I started drinking more, smoking weed, anything to dull the constant anxiety of waiting for that silence to fall. I convinced myself that if I was intoxicated enough, maybe I wouldn't care when she appeared, but it made it worse. The one time she appeared while I was high, I had a full-blown panic attack. I thought I was dying. I'm 1 month sober now. No alcohol, no weed, nothing. I needed a clear head to deal with this. Weirdly, since getting sober, her visits have become more frequent, almost like she knows I can't hide from her anymore. 2 nights ago, I experienced the worst visit yet. I was lying in bed, reading on my phone. When that familiar silence fell, I froze, afraid to look up from my screen. When I finally did, she was sitting at the foot of my bed, but this time she was turned slightly more toward me than ever before. Not fully facing me, but at maybe a 45-degree angle, like she was working up to it. Like someday soon, she's going to turn all the way around. What will I see when she does? Will there be a face under that bag? Will there be nothing at all? Will that be the moment she finally does whatever she's been waiting to do all this time? The silence is the worst part. It comes without warning. I'll be going about my normal day and suddenly everything goes quiet. That's when the dread hits me. That's when I know she's there, somewhere in my apartment, standing in a corner or sitting on my couch, waiting. I've started to wonder if I'm the only one who can see her. If my housemates had come home early that first night, would they have seen her sitting on my bed, or would they just have seen me, staring in terror at nothing? Sometimes I wonder if she's trying to tell me something, if there's a reason she keeps appearing. But if so, why not show her face? Why not speak? Why just stand or sit there, silent and still as a photograph? Last night, as I was brushing my teeth, the silence fell. I didn't even turn around. I just whispered, "What do you want from me?" into the mirror. No answer came. But when I finally got the courage to look behind me, she was standing closer than she'd ever been before, barely 3 feet away, still facing slightly away from me, but close enough that I could see the texture of the paper bag, the creases and folds in it. Close enough that I noticed for the first time that her sundress wasn't just yellow, it had tiny white flowers printed on it. I slammed my hand on the light switch, and she vanished, but the message was clear. She's getting closer. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm writing this during my lunch break at work, one of the few places she's never appeared. But I have to go home eventually, and night will fall, and at some point, that silence will descend again. And I fear that one night soon, Baghead will finally turn to face me, and I'll see what's under that bag. Story 5. I still get chills thinking about what happened with my painting teacher in Moscow last winter. I've never told this to anyone because it sounds completely insane, but I need to get this off my chest. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I swear every word is true. I'd been taking evening art classes at a small studio near Chisty Prudy for about 3 months. The teacher, Elena Volkov, was this talented artist in her early 40s, kind of mysterious but incredibly skilled. She had this intensity when she painted, like she was channeling something beyond herself. I was immediately drawn to her work and teaching style. The studio was in this old building with creaky wooden floors and high ceilings. During winter, it was always slightly too cold, and we'd paint with our coats on. Elena would light candles around the room for inspiration, she said. but I think it was also to warm the place up a bit. Everything was normal at first. We were a small group of 6 students, and Elena would teach us different techniques while sharing stories about famous Russian artists. She was particularly fascinated by the symbolists, those artists who believed art could reveal mystical truths. Then came that Thursday in January when everything changed. It was particularly cold that evening, around -20 outside, and I arrived early. Elena was already there, arranging candles in a strange circular pattern on the floor. I asked her what she was doing, and she just smiled and said she was cleansing the space. I didn't think much of it at the time. As we waited for the others to arrive, I helped her set up the easels. That's when she started telling me about her family. It began innocently enough, just casual conversation about her childhood in a small village outside St. Petersburg. But then she mentioned her grandmother. "My grandmother wasn't like other babushkas," she said while arranging brushes. "She knew things. She could do things." I asked what she meant, assuming she was talking about traditional folk remedies or something. What she told me made my skin crawl. She was what people would call a witch, Elena said matter-of-factly. Not the Halloween kind with a broomstick, a real one. She knew herbs and spells and could communicate with other realms. The way she said it, so casual, like she was telling me about her grandmother's baking skills, made it even more unsettling. I nervously laughed it off, but Eleanor wasn't joking. "My mother inherited some of her abilities," she continued. "She could heal people with her hands. When someone was in pain, her hands would become hot, burning hot, and when she touched the painful area, the pain would disappear." I nodded politely, thinking she was embellishing family stories, but then she held out her own hands and stared at them with this look of fear, disgust. I couldn't tell. "I have it too," she whispered. "The healing. But I don't use it anymore. Not after what it did to my mother." A cold draft swept through the studio, making the candle flames dance. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, and I suddenly felt trapped. "What do you mean?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. Elena sighed and sat down on a wooden stool. "The healing comes with a price. The pain doesn't just disappear, it transfers. My mother would take away someone's migraine, and then she would suffer from it for days. She healed my uncle's back pain once and couldn't walk for a week afterward. The other students were running late because of the snowstorm, so we were still alone in the studio. I should have changed the subject, but I couldn't. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion." "Is that why you don't use your ability?" I asked. She nodded. "Partly, but there's more." She lowered her voice. "I dream things, Marina, things that come true." My mouth went dry. The way she said my name made me feel like she could see right through me. "What kind of things?" "Deaths, mostly," she said, and my heart nearly stopped. "People come to say goodbye in my dreams the night before they die. It's happened 7 times now." She described how her grandfather visited her in a dream when she was 15, told her he loved her, and kissed her forehead goodbye. The next morning, they got the call that he died in his sleep. It kept happening. My high school teacher, an old neighbor, my mother's friend. They always come to say goodbye. I wanted to believe she was making it all up, but the tremor in her voice and the distant look in her eyes seemed too genuine. Outside, the snow was falling heavier now, blanketing Moscow in white silence. "There's something else," she said, her voice barely audible. "Something worse." I didn't want to hear it, but I couldn't move. When I wish for someone to die, really wish it, with real emotion behind it, it happens. My blood ran cold. I remember thinking I needed to leave, to get as far away from this woman as possible, but I was frozen in place. The first time was with my uncle Mikhail. He was a terrible man who hurt my cousin. I was 16 and so angry one night that I just wished he would die. I put everything into that wish, all my hatred. 3 weeks later, he had a heart attack. She must have seen the horror on my face because she quickly added, "I thought it was a coincidence. I really did, until my first love, Alexei." The candles flickered as she told me about her boyfriend from university, how deeply she had loved him, and how completely he had shattered her heart when he cheated on her with her roommate. "I was devastated," she said. "I wished he would get hit by a truck." Those were my exact words. 2 weeks later, he was crossing Tverskaya Street and a delivery truck ran a red light. My hands were shaking. I wanted to dismiss it all as coincidence or the delusions of a troubled mind, but something in me believed her. "Before it happened," she continued, "I had these dreams of him dying in a crash 3 nights in a row. I actually called him the day it happened. I begged him not to go out that day. He laughed at me. I glanced at the studio door, calculating how quickly I could leave. There was another one," she said, staring into a candle flame. "Dimitri. We met in Barcelona during an art residency. We fell in love, but then he suddenly left me stranded in Spain without explanation. I was so humiliated, so hurt. I wished he would go to jail." She looked up at me with those intense eyes. 6 months later, I heard from a mutual friend that he'd been arrested for tax fraud. He's still in prison. The studio suddenly felt colder. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally managed to ask. Elena looked startled, as if she'd momentarily forgotten I was there. "I don't know. I've never told anyone before. There's something about you, Marina. Something that makes me think you'll understand." I most definitely did not understand. I checked my phone. The other students were canceling because of the weather. I would be alone with Elena for the entire evening. "I should probably go too," I said, standing up. "The snow is getting worse." "No," she said too quickly, grabbing my wrist. Her hand was burning hot, just like she'd described her mother's. "Please stay. I need to show you something." Against my better judgment, I stayed. Elena went to a cabinet and pulled out a painting I'd never seen before. It was disturbing. Dark swirls of color with what looked like faces emerging from the chaos. In the center was a figure that resembled me. "I painted this 3 weeks ago," she said, "before I even met you." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The figure in the painting was undeniably me, down to the birthmark on my left cheek. "What does it mean?" I whispered. "I don't know," she admitted, "but there's a reason you came to my class, a reason we met." She reached for my hand again, and I flinched away. "You don't have to be afraid of me, Marina." But I was afraid, terrified, especially when she said her next words. "I think my abilities are getting stronger. Last night I dreamt about the entire class. Everyone was saying goodbye." I grabbed my bag and backed toward the door. "I need to go." Elena didn't try to stop me this time. She just watched with those sad, knowing eyes. "Be careful in the snow, Marina, and maybe don't come back next week." I practically ran through the snow to the metro station. I deleted Elena's number from my phone and blocked her email. I told myself she was mentally ill, that none of what she said could possibly be true. A week later, I saw the news. A fire had broken out in the old building where our art studio was located. The article mentioned that an evening art class had been in session. 5 students and the teacher, Elena Volkov, had died from smoke inhalation. 5 students, not 6. I would have been the 6th. I keep thinking about that painting with my face in it, about Elena's dreams of people saying goodbye before they died, about her warning me not to come back. Sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I swear I can feel heat radiating from my hands. And twice now, I've dreamed of people I haven't seen in years coming to tell me goodbye. I don't know what to do with this. I don't know if Elena somehow passed her curse to me, or if I'm just traumatized and paranoid. All I know is that I'm afraid to get angry now, afraid to wish for anything bad to happen to anyone, no matter how much they might deserve it. Last night, I dreamed about Elena. She was painting in that cold studio, surrounded by candles. When she saw me, she smiled and said, "Now you understand." Then she handed me a brush dripping with red paint. I woke up with my hands burning hot against my sheets. Story 6. I still remember that house so clearly. It's been over 15 years since we moved out, but sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I'm back there, feeling that same coldness that would creep up my spine for no reason. We moved in when I was 9. Dad got transferred for work, and Mom was excited about the neighborhood. It was fairly new, good schools nearby, and the house itself was really nice. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a finished basement. Nothing about it screamed haunted when we first saw it. No creepy history that the realtor mentioned, no mysterious deaths or anything like that. It was just a normal house in a normal suburb. The weird stuff started happening about 3 weeks after we moved in. At first, it was just little things that were easy to brush off. The basement bathroom was the first place that felt off. My sister Megan and I both refused to use it after the first month. We couldn't really explain why. There was just something about it that made the hair on your arms stand up. The air felt different down there, heavier somehow. Mom thought we were being dramatic, but even she admitted later that she hated going in there. The basement itself wasn't too bad during the day, but at night it was a completely different story. We had a TV room down there with a couch and some bean bags, and sometimes we'd watch movies as a family. But as soon as the sun went down, I'd start making excuses to go upstairs. There was this feeling of being watched that I couldn't shake. One night, about 4 months after we moved in, I was grabbing a snack from the kitchen when I heard Mom gasp from the living room. When I ran in, she was standing at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at nothing. "Did you see that?" she asked me, her voice shaky. I hadn't seen anything. "What was it?" "A shadow," she said, "moving up the stairs, but there's no one up there." Dad was working late that night and Megan was at a friend's house. It was just me and Mom, and I could tell she was genuinely freaked out. This wasn't like her at all. She was always the practical one, the one who explained away the creaking floorboards and strange noises. Maybe it was just the dogs, I suggested, but even as I said it, I realized both our dogs were right there in the living room with us. Speaking of the dogs, they were another weird thing. We had 2 golden retrievers, Max and Bailey. They were the most chill, friendly dogs you could imagine, but they acted strange in that house. They refused to go into certain rooms, especially the basement bathroom, and they'd often sleep on the stairs, which was fine, except sometimes they'd suddenly wake up and bolt away from the stairs like something had scared them. No noise, no obvious reason. They'd just suddenly freak out and run. Mom started noticing the shadows on the stairs more frequently. She'd see them when she was alone, always when there was no way they could be caused by car headlights or anything like that. The stairway didn't have any windows nearby, and the shadows would move up and down like someone was walking. Then came the photograph incident. We had this family portrait hanging in the hallway upstairs. Nothing special, just the 4 of us plus the dogs from a photo shoot we did right before moving. It had been hanging there for almost a year without any issues. One afternoon, while we were all in the kitchen having lunch, we heard a crash from upstairs. When we went to check, the picture had fallen off the wall. The weird part wasn't that it fell. The weird part was that the nail was still in the wall, perfectly intact, and the wire on the back of the frame was still in perfect condition. It was like someone had carefully lifted the frame off the nail and then dropped it. Dad tried to explain it away. Maybe the house had settled. Maybe there was a minor tremor we didn't feel. But I remember looking at Mom's face and knowing she didn't buy it. None of us did, really. But the light incident was when even Dad couldn't deny something weird was happening. It was during spring break, and Megan and I had convinced Mom to have a sleepover with us in the basement. Dad was away on a business trip, so we dragged mattresses downstairs and set up a little camp in the TV room. We stayed up late watching movies and eating popcorn. When it was finally time to sleep, around 1 in the morning, Mom asked, "Who's going to turn off the light?" None of us wanted to get up. The light switch was across the room, and even though we'd been having fun, there was still that underlying feeling of unease that came with being in the basement at night. Before any of us could volunteer, the light switched off by itself. We all froze. I could hear Megan's breathing speed up beside me. After a few seconds, Mom laughed nervously and said, "Must be a short in the wiring or something. We'll check it in the morning." But when morning came and Dad checked, there was nothing wrong with the light or the switch. It worked perfectly fine. He flipped it on and off several times to demonstrate. See, nothing to worry about. Except there was plenty to worry about, because that wasn't the only time it happened. Lights would turn on and off by themselves all over the house. Mom had to replace almost every bulb in the house multiple times during our last few months there, even though they were all relatively new when we moved in. The worst part, the part that still gives me nightmares sometimes, happened about 7 months before we moved out. I was 11 by then, and I had my own room upstairs. One night, I woke up suddenly around 3 in the morning. I don't know what woke me. There wasn't any noise or anything, but as soon as my eyes opened, I knew something was wrong. The room was colder than it should have been, even though it was summer, and there was someone there. Sitting in the chair at my desk was an elderly woman I'd never seen before. She had gray hair tied back in a bun, pale skin, and was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned dress with a pearl necklace. She wasn't doing anything threatening, just sitting there, looking at me. I was terrified, but also strangely calm. She didn't seem angry or scary, just sad maybe. I remember thinking that I should scream or run, but I couldn't move. We just looked at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. Then I finally got the courage to pull my blanket over my head. I counted to 10 slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. When I finally peeked out again, she was gone. The chair was empty, the room was still cold, and I was alone. I didn't tell anyone about it the next morning. I was afraid they wouldn't believe me, or worse, that they would, and we'd have to acknowledge that our house was really, truly haunted. But a week later, Megan came into my room in the middle of the night, shaking. "There was an old lady in my room," she whispered, "standing by my closet." That's when I told her about what I'd seen. We agreed to tell Mom, but not Dad. He was already stressed about work and we didn't want to make it worse. Mom listened to us both, and I could tell from her face that she wasn't surprised. She'd seen things too, though she never told us exactly what. After that, things escalated. The lights became more erratic. Items would disappear and reappear in different places. The dogs refused to be left alone in the house and would howl if we tried to leave them. The temperature would drop suddenly in certain rooms, even when the heating was on full blast. Mom started researching the history of the land the house was built on. The neighborhood itself was only about 15 years old, but she discovered that the area had once been part of First Nations territory. She theorized that maybe the house was built on an unmarked burial ground or some other significant site. We never found any concrete evidence, but it was the only explanation that made sense. The final straw came one night when I woke up to find the old woman sitting on the edge of my bed. This time, she looked directly at me and reached out her hand like she wanted to touch my face. I screamed so loud that everyone in the house came running. By the time they got to my room, she was gone, but I was hysterical. I refused to sleep in my room after that. We moved out 3 months later. Dad finally admitted that he'd been experiencing things too. Cold spots, the feeling of being watched, items moving. He'd been keeping it to himself because he didn't want to frighten us, but when he saw how terrified I was that night, he knew we couldn't stay. The strange thing is, the house sold quickly. I sometimes wonder if the new owners experienced the same things we did, but we never kept in touch with them. Mom had to replace almost every light bulb in the house before we left. They kept burning out at an alarming rate during those final months. Sometimes I think about that old woman. Who was she? What did she want? Was she tied to the house somehow, or to the land it was built on? Was she trying to communicate something or just make her presence known? I've never seen her again since we left that house, but I still look over my shoulder sometimes when I'm alone at night. The strangest part is that I never felt like she wanted to harm us. It was almost like she was curious about us, or maybe even liked having us there. Mom once said, maybe the spirit was lonely and didn't want us to leave. That's why the lights kept going out. It was her way of trying to keep us there a little longer. I don't know if I believe in ghosts or spirits or whatever you want to call them, but I know what I saw in that house, and no matter how many years pass, I'll never forget the old woman with the pearl necklace who visited me in the night. Story 7. I've been debating whether to share this for years. It happened when I was 14, and even though it's been almost a decade, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I've read similar experiences on here, and it finally gave me the courage to post my own. This happened in 2014 in our suburban home in Melbourne. It was mid-April during autumn school holidays. My parents had planned this little getaway to a cabin near the Grampians, about 3 hours from our place. My older brother Jamie, he was 17 then, went with them, but I stayed behind because my mate Lockie was having this massive birthday party on Saturday night that I'd been looking forward to for weeks. My parents were cool with me staying home alone. I mean, I was 14, not a little kid anymore. They left Friday afternoon and were coming back Sunday evening. I remember Mum going through this whole checklist with me before they left. Emergency numbers on the fridge, don't answer the door to strangers, all that stuff. Dad just reminded me not to burn the house down, which was his standard line whenever they left me alone. Saturday was pretty uneventful. I just played video games most of the day, texted my mates, and ate junk food without anyone telling me not to. Around 6 in the evening, I started getting ready for Lockie's party. I remember I was in a good mood because my parents had texted earlier saying they were having a great time at the cabin. Jamie had sent me a photo of himself with this massive fish he'd caught at the lake near their cabin. I hopped in the shower around 6:30. Our bathroom has this weird layout. The door doesn't fully close because the hinges are messed up, so it's always left partially open. I never bothered fixing it since I was home alone anyway. I had my phone playing music on the sink counter and was belting out the lyrics to some Imagine Dragons song, probably sounding horrible but not caring since no one was around to hear me. I was rinsing shampoo out of my hair, eyes closed with water running down my face, when I sensed movement near the doorway. You know that feeling when someone's watching you? That's what I felt. I wiped my eyes and looked toward the door, and that's when I saw Jamie walking past the bathroom. He glanced in, made eye contact with me, and with that typical big brother smirk said, "Fucking anon," before continuing down the hallway toward his bedroom. I stood there for a second, water still running over me, completely confused. My brain was trying to process why Jamie was home when he was supposed to be 3 hours away at a cabin with our parents. My first thought was that they'd come home early for some reason, though it seemed weird that no one had called to let me know. I quickly shut off the water, grabbed a towel, wrapped it around my waist, and stepped into the hallway. "Jamie?" I called out. No answer. I saw him walk into his bedroom and close the door most of the way, leaving it slightly ajar like he always did. I walked down the hall, leaving wet footprints on the carpet, and pushed his door open. "Hey, when did you guys get but—" The room was empty, completely empty. I stood in the doorway, dripping wet, staring at his perfectly made bed and the room exactly as he'd left it yesterday. The window was closed, the closet door was shut. There was nowhere anyone could have gone in the literal 3 seconds between when I saw him enter and when I opened the door. "Jamie," I called again, louder this time. Nothing. That's when a chill ran through me that had nothing to do with standing there wet in a towel. I searched his entire room, under the bed, in the closet, behind the door. Nothing. I checked the rest of the house, room by room, calling his name. Our house isn't that big. 3 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, 1 bathroom. There weren't many places to hide. My heart was racing by this point. I knew what I'd seen. It wasn't a glimpse or a shadow. I had clearly seen my brother, heard his voice, watched him walk down the hall and into his room. He was wearing the exact same clothes I'd seen him in yesterday before they left. His faded black Metallica t-shirt and grey trackies. His hair was messy like it always was. Everything about him was normal, except he wasn't supposed to be there. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and called my mum. She picked up on the 4th ring. "Tyler, everything okay?" she asked. "Is Jamie with you?" I blurted out, not even bothering with hello. "Of course he is," she said, sounding confused. We're all playing Monopoly. Jamie's winning as usual, and your dad's about to flip the board. I could hear laughter in the background. Can I talk to him? Please, Mum, it's important. Okay, hold on. I heard her call Jamie over. What's up, loser? Jamie's voice came through the phone, the same voice I'd heard minutes ago in our hallway. My stomach dropped. Have you been at the cabin all day? Yeah, why wouldn't I be? Dad and I went fishing this morning. I sent you that photo, remember? I couldn't speak for a moment. My throat felt tight. Tyler? You there? Jamie asked. I thought I saw you here, at home. Just now. There was a pause. What do you mean? I was in the shower and I saw you walk past. You looked at me and said, "Fucking anon," like you always do, and then you went into your room. But when I checked, no one was there. My voice was shaking by the end. That's weird, Jamie said, his tone changing from joking to concerned. I'm definitely here at the cabin. I've been here all day. Mum got back on the phone and I could tell she was worried. Tyler, are you sure you're okay? Did someone break in? No, I said quickly. The house is locked up. I don't know what I saw. She offered to come home early, but I insisted I was fine. I didn't want to ruin their weekend over what was probably just my imagination, even though it felt so real. I told her I was going to Lockie's party anyway, so I wouldn't be home much longer. After hanging up, I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at Jamie's bedroom door. I got dressed in a daze, constantly looking over my shoulder. The house felt different now, colder, unfamiliar. I kept hearing small noises and jumping. I ended up leaving for the party almost an hour early. I couldn't stand being in the house anymore. I told Lockie some excuse about why I was so early, but I couldn't focus on anything at the party. My mind kept replaying what I'd seen. The thing is, what I saw wasn't just some vague figure or shadow. It was Jamie, down to the smallest detail. The way his left eyebrow raises slightly when he smirks, the small scar on his chin from when he fell off his bike as a kid, his walk, his voice, everything was perfect. The only thing that seemed off was how quickly he moved down the hallway, almost hurried, and the way he slipped through his partially open door. I ended up leaving the party early and staying at Lockie's house that night. I couldn't face going back home alone. When my family returned Sunday evening, I tried to act normal, but I could tell Jamie felt weird about the whole thing. He kept looking at me like he was trying to figure out if I was messing with him. That night, when everyone was asleep, Jamie came into my room and sat on the edge of my bed. "Tell me exactly what you saw," he whispered. I described everything again, what he was wearing, what he said, how he looked at me. "That's freaky," he said after I finished. "I was wearing that exact outfit on Friday before we left." "I know, and that's what I always call you." "I know." We sat in silence for a while. "I've never been home," he finally said. "I swear on my life, Tyler, I was at the cabin the whole time." I believed him. Jamie and I fought a lot like most brothers, but we never lied to each other about serious stuff. We didn't tell our parents the full story. They'd either think I was making it up or get freaked out for no reason. We just said I thought I'd heard someone in the house, but it was probably nothing. But it wasn't nothing, and I still can't explain it. I've gone over that moment 1,000 times in my head. Could it have been a hallucination, a dream? But it was so vivid, so real. I wasn't tired or sick or on any medication. I wasn't stressed or anxious before it happened. It was just a normal day until it wasn't. The weirdest part is that whatever I saw knew exactly how to be Jamie. The way it called me Anon, that was Jamie's nickname for me since I was little and obsessed with staying anonymous in online games. No one else called me that, just him. It's been years now and I still get chills thinking about it. I've read about doppelgangers and spirits and all sorts of explanations, but nothing quite fits. Jamie moved out for uni a few years later, and I have to admit I was relieved when he did. Every time I saw him walking down that hallway after the incident, a part of me would freeze, wondering if it was really him. I still live in Melbourne, though not in that house anymore. Sometimes I wonder if someone else has seen something similar there since we moved, or if whatever it was followed us, or followed me. All I know is that for a few seconds on that Saturday evening, there were two versions of my brother existing simultaneously. One playing board games 3 hours away, and one walking past my bathroom door, seeing me, acknowledging me, and then vanishing into thin air, and I still have no idea what that means. Story 8. I still don't talk about this much. It's been over a decade now, but whenever I bring it up, people either think I'm making it up or they get weird about it. But I swear on everything I care about, what I saw was real, both times. The first time happened when I was about 11, so around 2011 or 2012. I lived in a small town in Yorkshire, northeast England. Nothing special about the place, just your typical English town with old stone houses, narrow streets, and endless fields once you got past the outskirts. My bedroom was on the second floor of our semi-detached house, with a window that faced the fields behind us. I remember waking up suddenly in the middle of the night, not like when you have a bad dream and jolt awake. This was different. It felt like something had pulled me out of sleep. The digital clock on my bedside table showed 3:24 in the morning. That time has stuck with me ever since. There was this strange humming sound coming from outside. Not particularly loud, but persistent, kind of like the sound you hear when you stand near power lines, but deeper somehow. It was annoying enough that it had probably woken me up. I got out of bed and went to my window. We had these thin curtains that let in a bit of light even when they were closed. I pulled them aside and looked out, not really expecting to see anything but the dark field behind our house. That's when I saw it. About 100 meters away, hovering silently above the field, was, well, I know how this sounds, but it was a flying saucer. Not some weird-shaped cloud or a drone or anything that could be explained away. It was a proper disc-shaped object, maybe the size of a car or small van, with a row of lights moving around its perimeter. The lights weren't flashing like airplane lights. They were steady, but rotating slowly around the edge of the craft. It was too dark to make out the color of the thing itself, but the lights were bright, not blindingly so, but clear as day against the night sky. And that humming sound was definitely coming from it. I stood there frozen, my hands gripping the windowsill so hard my knuckles turned white. I couldn't look away. The thing just hovered there, not moving much except for a slight wobble now and then, like it was adjusting its position. The lights continued their slow rotation around the edge. I don't know how long I watched it. Could have been 5 minutes, could have been 15. Time felt weird. I remember thinking I should wake my parents or grab my phone to take a picture, but I couldn't move. It was like I was glued to that spot. Then, without any warning, the craft started to move. It didn't speed off like in the movies. It just slowly ascended, going higher and higher until it was just a small circle of lights in the sky. Then it moved horizontally for a bit before disappearing completely. After it was gone, I finally managed to move again. My room felt freezing cold, even though it was summer. I got back into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin, staring at the ceiling until morning came. I told my parents at breakfast, but they just smiled and said I must have been dreaming. Maybe I was sleepwalking, or maybe it was the lights from a car on the distant road playing tricks on me. But I knew what I'd seen. I just couldn't prove it. I tried to forget about it. Honestly, I did. I convinced myself it was just my imagination or something. Kids have weird dreams all the time, right? But then it happened again, and this time I wasn't alone. It was a few months later, autumn of the same year. I'd started secondary school by then. Me and 5 or 6 of my mates were hanging out near the rugby grounds on the edge of town. It was that time in the evening when it's not quite dark yet, but the sun has gone down. Maybe around 7 or half past, we were just messing about, doing what 12-year-old boys do, throwing a ball around, trying to tackle each other, that sort of thing. Tommy was the first one to notice it. He pointed up at the sky and said, "What's that?" We all looked up, and at first I thought it was just a plane. We were used to seeing RAF jets flying over sometimes. There's a base not too far away. But as it got closer, we could all tell something wasn't right. It was moving too slowly for a jet, and the shape was wrong. It was broader, flatter, and it was flying way too low, like dangerously low, maybe 100 to 160 feet up, if that. Jamie, who was always into conspiracy theories and that sort of thing, was the one who said it out loud. "Is that a UFO?" As soon as he said it, I felt this cold sensation wash over me because I recognized it immediately as the same type of craft I'd seen from my bedroom window months before. It was heading straight toward us now, and we could all see it clearly. Same disc shape, same lights around the edge, same size, like a car or small van. But the weirdest thing, the thing that still gives me chills when I think about it, was the sound, or rather, the lack of sound. If it had been an RAF jet flying that low, we would have been covering our ears from the noise. Jets are deafening when they're at normal altitude, let alone when they're skimming the treetops. But this thing made almost no noise at all, just that same humming sound I'd heard before. But even that was faint, like it was somehow muffled. Most of my friends panicked. They started running back toward town, shouting and swearing. Can't blame them, really. But I couldn't move. It was like the first time. I was frozen to the spot, watching this impossible thing fly directly overhead, and that's when it got even stranger. As the craft passed directly above me, I looked down for just a second. I don't know why. Maybe it was just instinct, looking away from something scary. When I looked back up, the craft had changed. Where the disc-shaped object had been, there was now what looked like a military jet flying away from us, but it still wasn't making any noise, and the way it moved wasn't right either. It was gliding more than flying, if that makes any sense. I stood there until it disappeared from view, then ran to catch up with my friends. They were all freaking out, talking over each other about what we'd just seen. We agreed it was a UFO. What else could it have been? But the weird thing is, after that day, none of us ever brought it up again, not once. It's like we all silently decided to pretend it never happened. Years went by, I finished school, started working. Those memories never left me, but I pushed them down, told myself I was remembering it wrong, that it was just an RAF plane flying lower than it should have been, that the light had played tricks on us, that we were just kids with overactive imaginations. Then, about 3 years ago, I came across this bloke online who was investigating UFO sightings in Yorkshire. There've been quite a few over the years, apparently. I decided to email him, just to get it off my chest. I told him everything. Both encounters, exactly as I remembered them. I wasn't expecting much, maybe just confirmation that I wasn't the only one who'd seen something weird in that area. His response shook me. He didn't dismiss me or give me some rational explanation. He just said that wasn't a military craft. He knew just from my description that whatever we saw that day couldn't have been RAF. He told me the minimum legal flying height for military aircraft over populated areas is 500 feet, and they take that very seriously. No pilot would risk their career by flying as low as what we saw. But it was what he said next that really got to me. He said there had been multiple reports of similar craft in that exact area dating back decades, and that in several cases, witnesses described seeing the craft disguise itself as conventional aircraft when it realized it had been spotted. I don't know what to make of all this. I'm not saying it was aliens. I don't know what it was. But I know what I saw both times, and it wasn't anything that should exist according to what we're told about the world. The thing that bothers me most is how none of us ever talked about it again. 6 kids see something impossible, something that should have changed our understanding of reality, and we just move on, never mention it. How does that happen? Sometimes I wonder if there was something else at work there, some reason we all just forgot or chose to forget. I still live in Yorkshire, not far from where it all happened. Sometimes I find myself looking up at the night sky, half expecting to see those lights again. Part of me hopes I never do, but another part of me wants proof, something to confirm that I'm not crazy, that what I saw was real. Whatever it was there, both times. And I'm not the only one who's seen it. That's what keeps me up at night sometimes, knowing that there's something out there, something that isn't supposed to exist, flying over our heads while we sleep. Story 9. I never believed in ghosts. I always thought the paranormal stuff you see on TV was just made for views. That was until October 2024. Now, I can't sleep without the lights on, and I still wake up in cold sweats, wondering if something followed me home. It started as a stupid project for our YouTube channel. Me and 4 friends, Jake, Mia, Tyler, and Amber, had this little ghost hunting channel with maybe 200 subscribers. We'd explored a few abandoned houses before, but nothing serious. Then Jake suggested we investigate our high school after hours. Westlake High is almost 100 years old, and there've always been rumors about it being haunted. Teachers disappearing in the 70s, a student who supposedly hung himself in the gym in the 80s, that kind of stuff. My dad's the head janitor, so getting access wasn't that hard. I told him we needed to film a history project, and he gave me his spare keys, telling me to lock up and be out by 11. What he didn't know was we planned to stay until at least 3 in the morning. The witching hour, as Tyler kept calling it. We met up at the school around 8 that night. We had some basic equipment, an EMF meter Jake bought online, a spirit box app on Tyler's phone, and some voice recorders. Mia brought candles for a seance, which honestly made me nervous. I'd watched enough horror movies to know messing with that stuff was asking for trouble. The school looked completely different at night. The hallways felt longer, darker, the lockers like rows of metal coffins. Our footsteps echoed no matter how quietly we tried to walk. The whole place had this weird smell too, like old books mixed with something metallic. We set up in the main hallway first, right by the trophy case where most of the paranormal stories centered around. Tyler started with the spirit box, this app that cycles through radio frequencies supposedly allowing spirits to communicate. I thought it was complete bullshit until it started picking up words, not just random sounds, but actual coherent responses to our questions. "Is anyone here with us?" Mia asked. The box crackled, then, "Many." My skin crawled. It wasn't just the word, but how clear it came through. "Who are you?" Jake asked next. "Looking man." We all exchanged glances. None of us had ever heard of any looking man in the school legends. "What are you looking at?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You dot, always." Tyler almost dropped his phone. I felt like someone had just walked over my grave. We continued asking questions, and that's when we started getting responses from what seemed like different entities. One called itself the Bad Man, another Steve, and a female entity named Rachel. They each had distinct personalities, I guess you could say. Steve seemed neutral, Rachel confused, but the looking man and the bad man felt threatening. When we asked what they wanted, the bad man said something that still makes my blood run cold. "Tyler Field alone gift for Satan." Tyler immediately wanted to stop, but Jake kept pushing. "This is the best evidence we've ever gotten," he insisted. I was torn. Part of me was terrified, but another part was fascinated. Maybe we were just scaring ourselves with random radio chatter. We decided to try using a pendulum next. Amber held it over a piece of paper with yes and no written on it. We asked if the looking man was still with us. The pendulum swung violently toward yes, even though Amber's hand was completely still. When we asked where he was standing, it pointed directly behind me. I felt it then, a cold spot so intense it was like standing in front of an open freezer. The temperature dropped at least 15 degrees in just that one spot. Our breath started fogging in the air, but only mine. The others could breathe normally. "Guys, I think it's right behind me," I whispered, too afraid to turn around. "There's nothing there," Mia said, but her voice shook. I finally gathered the courage to look. Nothing visible, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. My phone battery, which had been at 87%, suddenly drained completely. The others' devices started malfunctioning too, cameras glitching, audio recorders picking up static. We decided that was enough for one night and packed up our stuff. As we were leaving, the janitor's keys, which I'd left on a nearby desk, had somehow moved to the middle of the hallway. None of us had touched them. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw a tall, shadowy figure standing in the corner of my room, just watching, looking. 2 weeks passed, and surprisingly, everyone wanted to go back. Our footage from that night had gotten us almost 1,000 new subscribers. People were asking for more. Jake had bought more equipment, a real EMF meter, a REM pod, which lights up when something passes near it, some cat balls, balls that light up when moved, dowsing rods, and a proper pendulum. This time my dad mentioned something interesting, the maintenance tunnels beneath the school. They were built in the 40s as fallout shelters, but now they just housed pipes and electrical wiring. He said we could check them out for our history project as long as we were careful. We met up on a Friday night, right after the football game ended and everyone had left. The tunnels were accessible through a door in the boiler room. They were narrow, with pipes running along the ceiling and walls covered in decades of graffiti. The air was thick with dust and the smell of mildew. Surprisingly, we didn't get much activity in the tunnels. The EMF meter barely fluctuated. The spirit box just gave us static, and the REM pod stayed silent. After about an hour, we decided to head back upstairs to the main building. That's when everything changed. We set up in the auditorium this time. It was built over part of the tunnel system, and rumors said a construction worker had been killed there during renovations in the 60s. Jake suggested we try a trigger event, essentially provoking whatever entities might be present. If there's anyone here who died in this school, we want to talk to you, Jake called out. If you're angry about your death, give us a sign. Nothing happened at first. Then I felt this pressure in my chest, like someone was sitting on me. It started as discomfort, but quickly became painful. Sharp, stabbing sensations that made it hard to breathe. I've never had heart problems or panic attacks before, so this came out of nowhere. "Guys, something's wrong," I gasped, clutching my chest. The REM pod suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree, beeping frantically even though no one was near it. The cat balls we'd placed in a triangle formation started rolling in circles, all by themselves. Tyler's spirit box erupted with voices. "Hurts. Make him hurt. Looking man sees." I collapsed onto a seat, the pain intensifying. It felt like someone was trying to crush my rib cage from the inside. Amber rushed over, asking what was wrong, but I couldn't speak. The lights in the auditorium began flickering, and the temperature dropped so low we could all see our breath now. "We need to stop," Mia said firmly. "This isn't worth it." The pain in my chest suddenly vanished, as quickly as it had appeared, but then Amber screamed. She said something had grabbed her hair and yanked her head back. When we checked, we found a small chunk of her hair missing, as if it had been pulled out. We decided to take a break until dawn. None of us wanted to leave the school, partly out of fear, partly because we still wanted to finish our video. We camped out in the cafeteria with the lights on, taking turns keeping watch while others tried to nap. At sunrise, we felt braver. Jake suggested we try one more location, the cemetery behind the school. It wasn't technically school property, but it was just across the back fence, and many of the school's former staff were buried there. The cemetery in the early morning light seemed peaceful enough. Birds were singing, dew covered the grass, and the whole place had that serene quality that graveyards often have during the day. We set up near the oldest section, where gravestones dated back to the 1800s. Mia led another séance, and immediately we felt a difference in the energy. The candle flames stood perfectly still despite the morning breeze. When we asked if anyone was with us, the pendulum swung violently. "Who are you?" I asked, through the spirit box. "Looking man, let me in." "In where?" Jake asked. "Circle. Let me in circle." We'd made a circle of salt around us, something Mia had insisted on for protection. The idea of letting whatever this was into our circle seemed like a terrible idea. "What will happen if we let you in?" Amber asked. "Show you, show all." Then multiple voices started coming through the spirit box, talking over each other. It sounded like the looking man was directing other entities, giving them orders. The REM pod was going crazy, lighting up in sequences that seemed almost deliberate. All of us suddenly felt a sharp pain in our backs, like someone was pressing a knife against our spines. Not enough to break the skin, but enough to hurt. The pain moved up and down my spine, as if someone was dragging something sharp across it. That was it. We broke the séance properly. Mia made us say goodbye and thank whatever spirits were present, packed up our equipment, and practically ran out of the cemetery. But we still hadn't gotten footage of the football field, the place the bad man had specifically mentioned 2 weeks earlier. Tyler refused to go alone, so we all went together. It was almost noon by then, broad daylight, which made us feel safer. We set up one last time in the middle of the field, right on the 50-yard line. As soon as Mia started the séance, the responses came immediately. Aggressive, threatening, insulting. Found you. Die here. Beneath you. The ground felt like it was vibrating beneath us. The EMF meter maxed out. Then Mia started screaming. She clawed at her back, saying it felt like someone was cutting her. When we lifted her shirt, there were 3 long scratches down her spine, already welling with blood. Then she vomited. Not just a little. It was violent, uncontrollable retching that went on and on. The vomit wasn't normal either. It was black, like oil, with a smell so foul we all gagged. We abandoned everything, the equipment, the candles, all of it, and ran. Jake and Tyler had to carry Mia, who couldn't stop throwing up. We got her to the hospital where doctors couldn't explain her symptoms. They eventually stopped on their own, and all tests came back normal. We never went back for our equipment. My dad called the next day, asking why we'd left all that weird stuff on the football field. I made up some excuse about getting sick and having to leave in a hurry. We haven't spoken much about what happened. Our YouTube channel sits abandoned. We haven't posted the footage and probably never will. Tyler transferred to another school. Mia sees a therapist now. Amber refuses to talk about it at all. As for me, I can't look at our school the same way. During class, I sometimes hear whispers when no one's talking. In the hallways, I feel watched. And sometimes, just sometimes, I catch glimpses of a tall figure standing at the end of corridors, just watching, looking. Whatever's beneath our high school football field is real. It's hostile, and I think it followed us home. Story 10. I still get chills thinking about that summer day 11 years ago. I was 13, sprawled out on my bed with my laptop propped up on a pillow, FaceTiming Jordan like we did almost every day. School had been out for about 2 weeks, and we were deep into that lazy summer routine where the days blend together. Jordan was my best friend since 4th grade. We were inseparable, the kind of friends who knew each other's families like our own. I probably spent more time at her house than mine that summer. Her parents both worked, so we had the place to ourselves most days. But that particular day, I was stuck at home because my mom needed me to wait for a package. It was around 3 in the afternoon. I remember because I kept checking the time, hoping the package would arrive so I could bike over to Jordan's afterward. The sun was streaming through my blinds, making stripes across my comforter. Jordan was in her room, talking about some drama with kids from our class while she organized her closet. "Hold on," she said, disappearing partially into her walk-in closet. "I need to find that shirt I borrowed from you." I wasn't really paying attention at first. I was scrolling through social media on my phone while half listening to Jordan's voice coming from my laptop. But then something caught my eye on the screen. Jordan's room was pretty standard for a 13-year-old girl in 2009. Posters of bands and movies, fairy lights strung along her headboard, and a white vanity table against the wall opposite her bed. Her phone was propped up on the vanity, giving me a clear view of most of her room while she rummaged around in her closet. That's when I noticed her vanity chair. It was one of those cushioned stools with no back, just a round seat with little wooden legs. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The chair seemed to shift slightly, like someone had bumped it. But Jordan was in her closet, at least 6 feet away. I stopped scrolling and focused on the screen. The chair moved again, just an inch or two, sliding away from the vanity as if someone had pulled it out to sit down. But there was nobody there. "Jordan," I called out, my voice sounding higher than normal. "Yeah? Just a sec," she answered from inside the closet. The chair moved again, this time a more definite slide. It was now about a foot away from the vanity. "Jordan, is someone else in your room?" I asked, sitting up straight now. "No, why?" Her voice was muffled. "Your chair is moving." She poked her head out of the closet. "What?" "Your vanity chair, it's moving by itself." Jordan stepped fully out of the closet, holding a pile of clothes. She looked at the chair, which was now nearly 2 feet from where it should have been. "That's weird," she said, but she didn't sound concerned, more confused. I didn't leave it like that. As we both watched, the chair slid another few inches across the carpet. There was no mistaking it this time. Jordan froze. The pile of clothes in her arms dropped to the floor. "Olivia, that's not funny." "I'm not doing anything. I'm at my house," I practically shouted. The temperature in my room felt like it dropped 10 degrees. I remember the goosebumps that spread across my arms, even though it was over 80 degrees outside. "Are you pulling some kind of prank?" Jordan asked, her voice shaking slightly as she approached the chair cautiously. "No, I swear, I'm just watching on FaceTime like you." Jordan reached out to touch the chair, as if to confirm it was real. That's when it happened. The chair suddenly jerked backward. Not slid, not moved, but flew, like someone had violently yanked it. It hit the wall with a loud thud that made both of us scream. Jordan jumped back, nearly tripping over the clothes she'd dropped. "What the hell?" I was frozen, staring at my screen. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Jordan, get out of there," I whispered. She stood in the middle of her room, looking around frantically. "I don't understand what's happening." "Just come downstairs. Go find your mom." I knew her mom wasn't home, but I was panicking. "She's at work," Jordan said, her voice small and scared. "Dad, too." "Then call someone." I was practically yelling now. Jordan took a deep breath. "It's probably nothing. Maybe the floor is uneven or something." Even at 13, I knew that chairs don't slide across carpet and slam into walls because of uneven floors. But Jordan was trying to be rational, and I wanted to believe her. "Let's just calm down," she said, though I could see her hands shaking. "I need to clean up this closet anyway. My mom will kill me if she sees this mess." "Are you serious right now?" I couldn't believe she was trying to continue with normal activities. I need to do something normal, okay?" She picked up a trash bag from her desk. "I need more bags. I'll be right back." Before I could protest, Jordan left the room. I watched her bedroom door close behind her, leaving me staring at an empty room through my laptop screen. The chair was still there, pressed against the wall where it had slammed into it. The silence was unbearable. I could hear my own breathing, too loud and too fast. On Jordan's end, there was nothing but the faint hum of her ceiling fan spinning lazily above the camera's view. That's when I noticed something else, a subtle movement at the very top of the screen. At first, I thought it was just a glitch, a pixel error or something. But then it became clearer. Something was lowering itself into the frame from above. It was thin and dark, dangling down like a string or cord. As more of it came into view, my blood turned to ice. It wasn't just any cord. It was shaped like a noose. The loop of rope swayed slightly, as if moved by an invisible hand. It hung there, directly in the center of the screen, impossible to miss or explain away. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My fingers fumbled for the mouse pad, desperate to end the call, to make what I was seeing disappear. I slammed my laptop shut and threw it off my bed like it was on fire. I was hyperventilating, tears streaming down my face. My phone started ringing almost immediately, Jordan calling back. I was terrified to answer, but even more terrified not to. "Hello?" I answered, my voice barely audible. "Why did you hang up?" Jordan sounded annoyed. "I was only gone for like 2 minutes. The rope," I stammered. "Did you see it?" "What rope? What are you talking about?" "There was a rope. like a noose, hanging from your ceiling, right in front of your camera. There was a long pause. That's not funny, Olivia. I'm not joking, I swear to God, Jordan, I saw it. There's no rope in my room, she said firmly, and that's a really messed up thing to make up. I'm not making it up. I was crying harder now. Please, just check your ceiling. This is stupid, she muttered, but I heard her footsteps as she moved around her room. There's nothing here, Olivia. No rope, no noose, nothing hanging from anywhere. But I saw it, I insisted, my voice breaking. Well, it's not here now. Maybe your screen glitched or something. I wanted to believe that. I desperately wanted a logical explanation, but I knew what I'd seen, and it wasn't a glitch. What about the chair? I asked. Another pause. It's back at my vanity. A cold wave washed over me. What do you mean it's back? Did you move it? No, I haven't touched it since it moved. But it's back where it belongs. I couldn't process what she was saying. The chair that had violently slammed into the wall was now perfectly placed at her vanity, as if nothing had happened. Jordan, I'm scared, I admitted, my voice small. Me too, she finally confessed. But let's not talk about it anymore today, okay? Maybe we're just freaking ourselves out. We tried to pretend everything was normal after that. We hung up soon after, both making excuses about chores we needed to do. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that noose swinging gently in front of the camera. The next day, we met up at the park halfway between our houses. We sat on the swings, barely moving, our shoes digging into the wood chips below. Did you tell your parents? I asked. Jordan shook her head. They'd think I was making it up for attention. Mine too, I agreed. We sat in silence for a while, neither of us knowing what to say. I didn't have any rope in my room, Jordan finally said, her voice barely audible. I checked everywhere after we hung up. There's nothing that could have looked like what you described. I know what I saw, I insisted. I believe you, she said, looking me directly in the eyes. That's what scares me the most. We made a pact that day to never FaceTime again. It sounds silly now, but at 13, it seemed like the only way to prevent whatever had happened from happening again. We didn't go to Jordan's house for weeks. When we finally did, we stayed downstairs, avoided her bedroom completely. Her family moved away 2 years later when her dad got a job in another state. We promised to stay in touch, but you know how it goes. We drifted apart, occasional texts becoming less and less frequent, but every few months, one of us will message the other with the same question. Remember that day? We never elaborate. We don't need to. We both know exactly which day we're talking about. It's been 11 years and I still get a sick feeling in my stomach when I think about it. I've never told anyone else the full story until now. Most people would think I was making it up or that we were just dramatic teenagers letting our imaginations run wild. But Jordan wasn't playing a prank. She wouldn't keep up a lie for 11 years, and I know what I saw. That chair moved on its own. That noose appeared out of nowhere. Sometimes I wonder if whatever was in Jordan's room that day is still there, waiting for someone else to witness it. Or worse, if it followed one of us out. I don't use FaceTime anymore. I can't. Even video calls for work make my palms sweat and my heart race. I always position my chair firmly against a wall where it can't move without me knowing, and I never ever look up at my ceiling when I'm alone in my room, because some things once seen can't be unseen, and some fears once planted never truly go away. I don't have an explanation for what happened that day. I probably never will. All I know is that it was real, it happened, and it changed me forever. Some people have traumatic experiences that shape them. Car accidents, deaths in the family, natural disasters. Mine was a vanity chair that moved on its own and a noose that appeared from nowhere. It sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, but I know what I saw, and every time my phone rings with a video call, part of me is terrified I'll see it again. Story 11. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts. I mean, sure, I've watched all those paranormal shows and movies like everyone else, but I always thought they were just entertainment. I'm not religious or spiritual, and I've always believed there's usually a logical explanation for weird stuff that happens. That was until March of last year, and I still don't have an explanation for what happened to me at the Millennium Knickerbocker Hotel in Chicago. My husband Mark and I got married in February of 2023, and we'd planned a small trip to Chicago as a mini honeymoon in March before our actual honeymoon in Hawaii that summer. We're both history buffs, so we specifically chose the Knickerbocker because of its age and connection to Chicago's past. It was built in 1927, right in the heart of Prohibition, and I'd read somewhere that Al Capone's brother had something to do with running it back then. Mark was super excited about staying somewhere with that kind of history. We arrived on a Thursday afternoon after a long drive from Michigan. The hotel was gorgeous in that old-school fancy way. Lots of brass fixtures, ornate moldings, and those beautiful old elevators with the fancy metal gates. The lobby had this vintage glamour that made me feel like I was stepping back in time. When we checked in, the woman at the front desk asked what brought us to Chicago. Mark, being his usual cheerful self, blurted out that we were newlyweds. I remember her face lighting up as she typed something into her computer. "Well, congratulations to you both. I'm going to upgrade you to one of our junior suites on the 12th floor. It's one of our nicest rooms," she said with a smile. We were thrilled. Who doesn't love a free upgrade? We spent that first day exploring the Magnificent Mile and had a late dinner at a steakhouse not far from the hotel. It was around midnight when we finally got back to our room, both of us exhausted but happy. The moment I stepped through the door, though, something felt off. Not scary, just weird, like walking into a room where people had just been arguing and you can feel the tension lingering in the air. Mark didn't seem to notice anything, and I figured I was just tired from traveling. The room itself was beautiful, way bigger than what we'd originally booked, with a king bed, fancy furniture, and a great view of the city. I took a hot shower to relax, and we were both asleep within minutes of our heads hitting the pillows. I woke up suddenly at exactly 2:34 in the morning. I know the time because I immediately checked my phone, confused about why I was awake. There was no noise that had startled me, no nightmare I could remember, but I was absolutely drenched in sweat. The room was unbearably hot, which made no sense because Chicago in March is still freezing, and we'd set the thermostat to 68 before going to bed. My heart was racing like I'd just run a marathon, and I had this overwhelming sense of dread, like something terrible was about to happen. You know that feeling when you're home alone and you hear a noise that doesn't belong? That spike of adrenaline and fear? It was exactly like that, except I wasn't alone. Mark was right beside me, snoring softly. I sat up and tried to catch my breath. The sweat was pouring down my back, and my nightshirt was sticking to my skin. I thought maybe the hotel's heating system had malfunctioned, so I got up to check the thermostat. It still read 68 degrees, but there was no way the room was that cool. It felt like it was at least 90 degrees in there. I decided to try opening a window to get some air. As I crossed the room, the heat seemed to intensify, pressing down on me like a physical weight. My skin was burning, and I could barely breathe. And then I felt it. Someone was watching me, not like when you're walking alone at night and get paranoid. This was certain. I knew someone's eyes were on me, following my every move. I froze halfway to the window, afraid to turn around, but even more afraid not to. The feeling of being watched was coming from the direction of the bed. Slowly, I turned around, expecting to see Mark sitting up, maybe wondering what I was doing. But Mark was still fast asleep on his side of the bed, and between us, oh God, between us was someone else. There was a woman lying in our bed. She wasn't solid like a normal person. I could see the pattern of the bedspread through her body, but she was definitely there. She had pale, almost translucent skin and a black bob haircut, styled like something from the 1920s. Her lips were dark, not red, but more like a deep plum or brown, and her eyes were open, looking right at me. She was wearing what looked like a brown silk negligee, old-fashioned with lace trim. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just stood there staring at this ghost, spirit, whatever she was, lying in bed next to my husband. She didn't look angry or menacing. In fact, she gave me this small smile, like we shared some kind of secret. That smile was somehow worse than if she'd looked threatening. The heat in the room was unbearable now. I could feel sweat dripping down my face, my legs, my arms. My vision started to blur around the edges, and I thought I might pass out. The woman's smile widened slightly, and then the strangest thing happened. She started to sink into the mattress, not like she was moving down, but like she was phasing through it. First her legs disappeared, then her torso, and finally her face, that smile being the last thing to vanish. The moment she was gone, the heat vanished too. It was like someone had flipped a switch. 1 second, I was burning up, and the next I was standing in a perfectly normal, slightly cool hotel room. The only evidence that anything had happened was my sweat-soaked pajamas and my racing heart. I stood there for what felt like forever, afraid to move. Mark hadn't stirred at all during any of this. Finally, I made my way back to the bed, but there was no way I was getting back in it. I grabbed a blanket from the closet and curled up in the armchair by the window, where I could see the whole room. I didn't sleep at all for the rest of the night. When Mark woke up around 7, he found me still sitting in that chair, wrapped in the blanket and staring at the bed. "What are you doing over there? Didn't you sleep?" he asked, completely oblivious to what had happened. I didn't know what to tell him. How do you explain to someone that you saw a ghost woman in your bed without sounding completely insane, especially when he'd slept right through it? So I lied and said I'd had insomnia and didn't want to disturb him by tossing and turning. Over breakfast, I casually asked the concierge about the hotel's history, specifically if there were any stories about room 1224. "Oh, this whole building has quite a history," he said. "It was a speakeasy during Prohibition. Al Capone's brother Ralph was involved in running it. The top floor was a casino and, well, there were certain other services available, if you know what I mean." He gave me a knowing look. "Any ghost stories?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He laughed nervously. "Officially, the hotel doesn't acknowledge any hauntings, but between us, some guests have reported unusual experiences over the years, mostly on the upper floors where the speakeasy was." "Why do you ask? Did you see something?" I just shook my head and thanked him for the information. What was I supposed to say? That I'd shared my bed with the ghost of what was probably a Prohibition-era prostitute? We checked out that day, a day earlier than planned. I made up some excuse about wanting to visit friends in the area, but the truth was, I couldn't stand the thought of spending another night in that room. Mark was disappointed but went along with it. I've spent months trying to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was a hypnagogic hallucination, some weird half-dream state. Maybe there was a gas leak causing both the heat and the hallucination. Maybe I ate something that didn't agree with me. I've gone through every possible explanation, but none of them feel right. What I experienced felt real. The heat, the fear, that woman's smile. It all felt completely real. I've never experienced anything like it before or since, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. What bothers me the most is how intimate it felt. She wasn't just a random apparition floating across the room or making noises. She was in our bed between me and my husband, looking at me like she knew me. I've never told Mark the full story. He knows something happened that freaked me out, but I've never described what I saw. I'm afraid he'll think I'm crazy, or worse, that he'll believe me and be as scared as I am. Because the truth is, I'm still scared. Not just of what I saw, but of what it might mean. If ghosts are real, what else might be out there that we don't understand? Sometimes I still wake up at 2:34 in the morning, sweating and afraid, feeling like someone's watching me. And in those moments, I swear, I can almost see her smile again in the darkness of our bedroom. Story 12. I never wanted to move to Vail. I was 10 years old when my parents told us we were leaving North Carolina for some tiny town in Oregon I'd never heard of. My dad got this job opportunity he couldn't pass up, and just like that, my whole life was packed into boxes. I wasn't happy about it, but my brother Marcus seemed fine with everything. He's 2 years older than me and adapts to stuff easier, I guess. The first day at Vale Elementary is something I'll never forget, no matter how hard I try. It was mid-October, and the school building looked normal enough from the outside. Brick, 2 stories, probably built sometime in the 80s. Nothing special. Mom dropped us off that morning, and I remember the knot in my stomach as I watched her car pull away. Marcus immediately found some boys to talk to and ditched me at the front steps. "You'll be fine, Eliza," he said, not even looking back. The main hallway was crowded with kids rushing to their classrooms before the bell. I clutched my schedule, trying to find room 118. That's when I saw the first one, a woman in what looked like an old-fashioned nurse's uniform, except half her face and arm were severely burned, the skin blackened and peeling away. She walked right through a group of 6th graders who didn't react at all. I froze in the middle of the hallway. The nurse turned toward me, her good eye widening as if surprised. Then she disappeared through a wall. I thought I was seeing things, I really did. The stress of moving, starting a new school, my mind was playing tricks. That had to be it. I made it to my classroom and tried to focus on being the new girl, which was hard enough without hallucinations, but it didn't stop. During math, I saw an elderly man with burn scars covering his neck and chest wandering between the desks. At lunch, there was a young boy, maybe 6 or 7, sitting alone at an empty table. Half his body was charred black. No one else saw him. No one reacted when he stood up and walked straight through the wall. By the end of that first day, I'd counted 8 different people, ghosts. Whatever they were, they all had the same terrible burns, some worse than others. None of the other kids seemed to notice anything unusual. When Marcus met me after school, I was shaking. "What's wrong with you?" he asked as we waited for Mom. "Do you see anything weird in the school?" I asked cautiously. He rolled his eyes. "Like what?" "Like people with burns, walking through walls." Marcus laughed so hard other kids turned to look at us. "You're such a freak, Eliza. This is why you don't have friends." I didn't bring it up again. Not to him, not to my parents. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, but every day, there they were, the burn victims, walking the halls, standing in corners, sometimes just staring out windows. They never seemed to notice each other, only wandering around in their own little worlds. After a week, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. During library period, I approached Mrs. Patterson, the librarian. She was this tiny woman with thick glasses and silver hair who always smiled at me when I came in. "Mrs. Patterson, do you know if anything bad ever happened at this school?" I asked quietly. She looked up from her computer. "What do you mean, dear? Like a fire or something?" Her expression changed immediately. She glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "Not at the school, no," she said, lowering her voice. "But this land, well, there used to be a hospital here before they built the school, back in the 60s. It was small, just served the local community." My heart started beating faster. "What happened to it?" Mrs. Patterson sighed. "There was a terrible fire. Oxygen tanks exploded in the East Wing. 23 people didn't make it out. Patients, nurses, a few doctors. They closed it down after that. The building sat empty for years until they demolished it and built the school in 1982. 23 people. I'd only seen 8 so far, but somehow I knew I'd eventually see them all. Why do you ask, Eliza? Mrs. Patterson looked concerned. Just curious about the history. I lied. I like old buildings. For the next few weeks, I tried to ignore them. I walked with my eyes down in the hallways. I focused on my textbooks when one would appear in class. It almost worked until one of them noticed me. He was tall and thin, wearing what might have been a doctor's coat, though it was hard to tell with the burn damage. His face was the worst I'd seen, barely recognizable as human, just raw, charred flesh with one eye sunken into the ruined socket. I made the mistake of staring too long when I saw him standing by the water fountain. He turned his head slowly, that one good eye fixed on me, and I knew instantly. He could tell I saw him. I looked away immediately, but it was too late. The next morning, he was waiting by the front doors when I arrived. As I walked past, I felt a cold spot, like walking through a freezer. Throughout the day, he followed me. Not constantly, but he'd appear in my classroom, in the cafeteria, always watching me with that single milky eye. The third day was worse. He started screaming, a horrible guttural sound that no one else could hear. I had to clamp my hands over my ears during social studies, which got me sent to the office for disrupting class. How could I explain that the screaming wasn't coming from me? By the end of the week, he'd figured out how to affect things around me. Nothing major, a pencil rolling off my desk, my lunch tray sliding an inch across the table, my backpack tipping over when no one was near it. Small things, but enough to terrify me. I started faking sick to avoid school. My mom caught on pretty quick. "Eliza, what's really going on?" she asked one morning after I'd claimed a stomachache for the third day in a row. I almost told her. The words were right there. But then what? She'd think I was crazy. Or worse, she'd believe me. And then what could she even do? Move us again. Dad's job had us stuck here. "I just don't like it here," I said instead. "The kids are mean." That wasn't entirely a lie. Being the weird new girl who sometimes talked to herself or jumped at nothing didn't exactly make me popular. My mom made me go to school anyway. The burn doctor was waiting as usual, but now he'd escalated to trying to touch me, reaching out with those blackened fingers whenever I was alone in the bathroom or an empty hallway. I could feel the cold radiating from him, like standing in front of an open freezer. One night I was so scared I couldn't sleep. I remember sitting up in bed looking out my window at the stars and just praying, not really to anyone specific, just begging for help, for protection, for something to make it stop. "Please," I whispered into the darkness, "I can't do this anymore. Please help me." The next day started like any other. The burn doctor was at his usual post by the front doors, but as I approached, something strange happened. A flicker in the air beside me, like heat rising from pavement. The doctor's ruined face contorted in what looked like fear, and he backed away. Throughout the day, I noticed it more clearly. Whenever the burned spirits came near me, that same shimmer would appear, and they would retreat. By lunchtime, I caught a glimpse of what was causing it, or rather, who. He was a young man in an old-fashioned military uniform, World War II maybe. Unlike the others, he had no burns, no visible injuries at all. He stood at attention near my table, his eyes constantly scanning the cafeteria. When the burned boy approached from across the room, the soldier moved between us, and the boy immediately vanished. It took me 3 days to work up the courage to acknowledge him. We were alone in the hallway during class when I finally whispered, "I can see you." He turned, surprised. "About time, Eliza." His voice wasn't like the others, not hollow or distant, but clear, almost normal. "How do you know my name?" He smiled slightly. "I've known you since you were 5. The camping trip with your family in the Blue Ridge Mountains. You wandered away from your campsite." The memory hit me like a truck. I'd gotten lost in the woods for hours. My parents were frantic. I remembered following a butterfly and then being terrified when I couldn't find my way back. But I also remembered a nice man showing me the way. My parents had searched the area afterward, wanting to thank whoever had helped me, but they never found anyone. "Wyatt." The name came to me suddenly. He nodded. "You remember. But you're dead?" "Yeah, have been since 1944. "Why are you here? This isn't where you died." "I go where I'm needed." He shrugged. "And you needed me." After that, school became bearable. Wyatt was always there, keeping the burned spirits away from me. He explained that most ghosts can't see each other. They're trapped in their own little loops of time, reliving moments or just wandering aimlessly. But some, like him, were different, more aware, more present. The ones who are following you, they know they're dead. he explained one day as we sat in the empty library during recess. They're angry about it, confused. They sense that you can see them, and it gives them purpose. Why can I see them when no one else can? Wyatt's expression grew serious. Some people just have thinner veils between worlds. Usually happens after a near-death experience. The camping trip, I'd fallen into a creek, hit my head on a rock. I remembered the cold water, the panic, not being able to breathe. Will they ever leave me alone? I asked. They might eventually, or you might learn to control it better. Block them out when you want to. He was right. Over the next few months, I started to develop a kind of mental shield. I could feel when spirits were near, but I could choose not to fully see them. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes they'd break through, especially if I was tired or upset. Those were the days kids would catch me talking to nothing or flinching away from empty air. The rumors spread. Eliza talks to herself. Eliza's crazy. Eliza jumped 3 feet because the empty doorway scared her. My brother was the worst about it. Stop being such a freak, he'd hiss when he caught me whispering to Wyatt. You're embarrassing me. I never told anyone the truth, not my parents, not the school counselor they eventually made me see, not the few kids who were nice enough to sit with me at lunch. How could I? I see dead people isn't exactly something you drop into casual conversation. The burned doctor still watches me sometimes from a distance. Wyatt keeps him back, but I can feel his hatred, his frustration at being kept away. The others have mostly given up, returned to their endless wandering through the halls that once held hospital beds and medical equipment. I'm 13 now. We've been in Vale for 3 years. I've learned to live with it, mostly, to pretend I don't see what I see. To act normal, even when there's a man with half his face missing standing behind my math teacher. But sometimes late at night, I still hear the screaming, and I wonder if I'll ever truly be free of them, or if this is just my life now, forever walking between 2 worlds, never fully belonging to either. Today, a new spirit appeared in the science lab, a woman I've never seen before, with no burns but a terrible wound in her chest. She looked directly at me and said my name. Wyatt wasn't there to intervene. She's not from the hospital fire. She's something else entirely, and I don't know what to do. Story 13. I've never told this story outside of a few people in my life, mainly because I'm terrified people will think I'm crazy. But I need to get this off my chest because it's been haunting me for over 25 years now, and I still don't have answers. This all started back in 1994 in Richmond, Virginia. I was 7 years old, living in this rundown apartment complex with my mom and older sister. The buildings were arranged in this horseshoe shape with a common area in the middle where all the neighborhood kids would play. We didn't have much money for toys or anything, so we spent most of our time just exploring and making up games. One hot summer day, me and 2 other kids from the complex, Michael and Tanya, were digging in this patch of dirt between buildings. We weren't looking for anything specific, just digging holes like kids do. After about an hour of this, my shovel hit something hard. I remember the sound clearly, a hollow wooden thud. We all got excited and started digging faster, eventually uncovering what looked like an old wooden box. It wasn't very big, maybe the size of a shoebox, but it was heavy for its size. The wood was dark and weathered with these weird symbols carved into the lid that none of us recognized. They weren't letters or numbers, more like strange geometric patterns with curved lines connecting them. Being kids, we immediately pried it open. Inside, nestled in some kind of faded velvet lining, were 3 small brass bells. They were about the size of golf balls, with the same strange markings etched into the metal as on the box. Each bell had a slightly different tone when rung, and the sounds they made were unusually clear and lingering. We decided to each take 1 bell. I don't know why we split them up instead of showing our parents or something. It just seemed like the thing to do. I took 1, Michael took another, and Tanya got the 3rd. The box we just left there, half buried in the dirt. I sometimes wonder if it's still there, or if someone else found it. That night, I kept my bell on the nightstand next to the mattress I shared with my sister in our 1-bedroom apartment. I remember playing with it before bed. rolling it around in my hands and ringing it softly. The sound it made was so strange. It seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have, like it was echoing from somewhere else. I must have fallen asleep eventually, but I woke up in the middle of the night. I remember opening my eyes and immediately feeling that something was wrong. The room was cold, unnaturally cold for a Virginia summer night, and there was this smell, like ozone or the air right before a lightning storm. Then I saw it. Standing next to our mattress was this figure. It was small, maybe 3 feet tall, and wearing what looked like a dark hooded robe. But what I remember most clearly were its eyes. They were huge, way too big for its small grayish face, and completely black, like looking into empty space. Its skin had this weird grayish blue tint that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. I was completely paralyzed with fear. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything but stare at this thing as it stood there, just watching me. I tried to wake my sister, even managed to nudge her a bit, but she just mumbled and rolled over. The creature didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me with those massive black eyes. I felt like it was looking straight through me, like it could see every thought in my head. I don't know how long we stayed like that. It felt like hours, but was probably just minutes. Eventually, I must have passed out from sheer terror. When I woke up the next morning, I convinced myself it had been a nightmare, but then I noticed the bell on my nightstand had moved from where I'd left it, and there was this faint, dusty footprint on the floor next to our mattress, way too small to belong to anyone in my family. I told my sister about what I'd seen, but she just laughed it off, saying I had an overactive imagination, but I knew what I saw was real. That day, I went to find Michael and Tanya to ask if anything weird had happened to them. Michael looked pale and tired. Before I could even ask, he told me he'd had a weird dream about a small person in his room. Tanya hadn't experienced anything, but she lived in a different building than us. That's when I started to suspect it had something to do with the bells. For the next few nights, the same thing kept happening. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find that small figure standing by my bed just watching me. Sometimes there would be more than one, a taller one standing behind the smaller one, its features hidden in the shadows except for those same large black eyes. I tried to convince my sister it was real by giving her my bell to play with one night. The next morning, she was white as a sheet. She told me she'd seen a tall one and a little one standing by our window, looking in at us. She described them exactly as I'd seen them. Grayish skin, huge black eyes, wearing dark hooded clothing. She said they looked like the aliens she'd seen in a magazine, but somehow worse because they were actually there, in our room. After that, we hid the bell in a shoebox at the back of our closet and tried to forget about it. For a while, the visitations stopped, and we convinced ourselves it was over, but it wasn't. 3 years later, we moved to San Antonio, Texas. The bell came with us, still hidden in that shoebox. I'd almost forgotten about it until one day when I was cleaning out my closet and found it again. I didn't ring it or anything, just looked at it for a moment before putting it back. That night, they returned. Same creatures, same paralyzed fear. This time they were standing at the foot of my bed. I had my own room by then. The tall one seemed to be studying me, tilting its head like it was trying to figure something out. A few weeks later, we became friends with these 2 Korean sisters who lived down the street. One day, I told them about the bell and the creatures. They didn't believe me, of course, so I let them borrow the bell, warning them not to ring it. The next morning, they were at our door at 7 a.m., looking terrified. They thrust the bell back into my hands and told me they'd seen something looking in through their second-story bedroom window during the night, something with huge black eyes and grayish skin. They never came over to our house again. The most disturbing encounter happened when I was 12. I woke up to find one of the smaller creatures standing right next to my face. I was so tired of being afraid that something in me snapped. I actually reached out and knocked on its forehead with my knuckles like I was checking if it was real. Its skin felt cool and slightly rubbery, and the moment I touched it, this high-pitched sound filled my head. It wasn't an actual sound I heard with my ears. It was like it was inside my mind, a piercing telepathic screech that made my whole body vibrate. I passed out immediately. When I woke up the next morning, there was a small bruise on my forehead in the exact spot where I'd touched the creature, and scattered across my bedroom floor were dozens of small brass shavings, like someone had been filing down metal. The bell, when I checked it, looked slightly smaller, with one of the symbols partially worn away. After that, I took the bell and buried it in our backyard, as deep as I could dig. But even with the bell gone, they still came occasionally, less frequently, maybe once every few months instead of weekly, but they were still there. I'm 35 now, and I still see them sometimes. I'll wake up in the middle of the night to find one of them standing at the foot of my bed or by my window. My husband has never seen them, though he's woken up a few times to find me sitting upright, staring in terror at an empty corner of our bedroom. I've tried everything, moving to different states, seeing therapists, even having a priest bless our house. Nothing works. They always find me. I've often wondered what they want. They've never tried to harm me physically, never taken anything or left anything behind, except for those brass shavings that one time. They just watch, like they're waiting for something. Sometimes I wonder if they're even real, or if Michael and I and my sister and those Korean girls all shared some kind of mass hallucination. But then I remember the feeling of my knuckles against that creature's forehead, the cool, slightly rubbery texture of its skin, and I know they're real. I've researched similar experiences online and found some accounts that sound similar to mine. People who've encountered small, hooded figures with large eyes. Some call them aliens, others call them interdimensional beings or even demons. I don't know what to call them except visitors. I never found out what happened to Michael or Tanya or their bells. We lost touch after I moved away from Richmond. Sometimes I wonder if they still experience the visitations too, or if burying their bells worked better for them than it did for me. The strangest part is that I'm not as afraid anymore. After almost 30 years, the terror has faded into a kind of resigned acceptance. They're just part of my life now, these nighttime visitors who never speak, never act, just watch. But I still wonder what they want, and I still hear the echoes of those bells sometimes in my dreams, that unnaturally clear, lingering tone that started it all. Whatever connection was formed when we found that box all those years ago, it's still there, and I don't think it's ever going to go away. Story 14. I've always considered myself a rational person. I'm a man of science, an MRI technician at Oak Ridge General Hospital in Massachusetts for almost 7 years now. I don't believe in ghosts or any supernatural nonsense, or at least I didn't until 3 months ago. It was a Tuesday evening in February. We'd had a pretty standard day, outpatients, inpatients, the usual mix. I was on a late shift with Sarah and Mike, 2 other techs I've worked with for years. We were supposed to finish at 11 and the department was winding down. Around 9:30, I was in the control room updating some patient records when I noticed an elderly woman being wheeled past our department towards CT. Nothing unusual about that, except something about her stuck with me. She had this wild, disheveled gray hair that stuck out in all directions, like she hadn't combed it in days. Her skin was this sickly pale color, and her eyes, they were open but vacant, staring at nothing in particular. I remember thinking she didn't look well at all. She was completely still on the stretcher, didn't move a muscle, just lay there with that empty stare. The porter pushing her was chatting with one of the nurses, and I overheard them saying something about routine head scan and confusion. I went back to my paperwork, but about 15 minutes later, I heard it. The hospital alert code for cardiac arrest blaring through the speakers. Then the crash team went running past our department towards CT. You know that feeling when your stomach drops? That's what happened. I just knew it was for that elderly woman. Mike came in and confirmed it. That old lady they just took to CT arrested on the table. They're working on her now. We found out later she died right there in the CT room, never even made it to the scan. Apparently she'd coded during the prep. They'd tried resuscitation for almost 40 minutes before calling it. These things happen in hospitals. It's sad but not exactly unusual. I felt bad for her but went back to work. We still had patients to scan. By 10:40, we'd finished with our last patient. The three of us, me, Sarah, and Mike, were shutting down the department. We'd locked the waiting room doors since no more patients were coming in. We were the only ones left on this floor aside from security, who were stationed at the main entrance of the hospital. I was wiping down the MRI table when Sarah called out from the corridor. "Guys, do you hear that?" I paused and listened. There was a faint but distinct sound coming from the main corridor, the squeaky wheels of a hospital bed or stretcher. The sound was getting louder, coming toward our department. "Who the hell is bringing a patient now?" Mike muttered, heading toward the corridor. "We're closed." We all stepped out into the main hallway, which runs the length of the imaging department with various rooms branching off it. At the far end, about 30 meters away, was the corridor junction that leads to CT and the rest of the hospital. The squeaking stopped, and that's when we saw her. Standing at the far end of the corridor, completely motionless, was a figure. Even from that distance, I could make out the wild, unkempt gray hair sticking out in all directions. The same woman I'd seen earlier, the woman who had died in CT. My first thought was that there had been some mistake. Maybe she hadn't died. But I'd heard the code, heard the staff talking afterward. There was no mistake. "Do you see that?" I whispered. Sarah grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in so hard it hurt. "Thomas, who is that?" Mike took a step forward. "Hello? Can we help you?" No response. The figure didn't move at all, just stood there staring down the corridor at us. I couldn't make out her face clearly from that distance, just the silhouette and that distinctive wild hair. "This isn't funny," Mike called out, his voice echoing down the empty hallway. The department's closed. Still nothing, just that motionless figure standing there. "Should we call security?" Sarah whispered. I nodded, but no one moved. We were all frozen, staring at this impossible thing. The woman who had died hours earlier was somehow standing at the end of our corridor. Then the lights at that end of the corridor flickered, once, twice, and went out, plunging that section into darkness. When they came back on a second later, the figure was gone. "What the fuck was that?" Mike's voice was shaking. I'd never heard him sound scared before. Sarah was trembling beside me. "Please tell me you both saw that too." "I saw it," I confirmed, my mouth dry. "Let's check the MRI room and make sure everything's locked up, then get out of here." We retreated to the MRI room, checking that the machine was properly shut down. No one wanted to go back into that corridor alone. We stood there for maybe 5 minutes, gathering our courage. "This is ridiculous," I finally said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "There's got to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was someone who looked similar." "At this hour? In a closed department?" Sarah shook her head. "And how do you explain her disappearing like that?" "She probably just walked away when the lights flickered," I suggested, not believing it myself. "All three of us saw the same thing," Mike said quietly. "That was the woman who died in CT today." Eventually we had to leave. We couldn't stay in the MRI room all night. We stepped back into the corridor together, and I immediately noticed something wrong. All the lights were off. The entire corridor was dark. I distinctly remembered turning on the lights at the start of our shift, and they automatically stay on until midnight. It was only 11. No one had turned them off. Mike found the switch and flipped it. The fluorescent tubes buzzed to life, illuminating an empty corridor. No sign of anyone. "I'm calling security," Sarah said, already dialing on her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. Security arrived within minutes. 2 guys I knew well, Dave and Raj. They listened to our story with increasingly skeptical expressions. "We'll check the cameras," Dave said, "but I can tell you right now, no one's been on this floor except you 3. The elevator logs show no activity for the past hour. and the stairwell doors have alarms that would have triggered if anyone used them. Check the camera at the corridor junction, I insisted. You'll see her. They did check. There was nothing on any of the cameras. No elderly woman with wild hair, no figure standing at the corridor junction. Nothing but an empty hallway. Maybe it was just a shadow, Raj suggested kindly. It's late, you're tired. But I knew what I'd seen, what we'd all seen. They escorted us to our cars. I don't think any of us wanted to walk through the hospital alone after that. I drove home in a daze, replaying the image of that motionless figure over and over in my mind. The next day, I looked up the elderly woman's information in our system. Her name was Eleanor Mitchell, 84 years old, admitted for confusion and disorientation after a fall at her nursing home. She died of sudden cardiac arrest at 9:47 p.m., about an hour before we saw her figure in the corridor. I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was mass hysteria. All three of us thinking we saw something because we were tired and on edge after hearing about her death. Maybe it was just someone who looked similar. Maybe it was nothing but shadows and an overactive imagination. But I know what I saw, and my body knows too. Every time I have to walk past the CT room now, I get physically ill. My stomach churns, my skin goes clammy, and I break out in a cold sweat. I've had to ask to be rescheduled so I don't work evenings anymore. Sarah requested a transfer to another department. Mike quit 2 weeks later, said he found a better paying job elsewhere, but I know the real reason. I'm not a superstitious person. I don't believe in ghosts, or I didn't. But I can't explain what happened that night. Sometimes I think about Eleanor Mitchell, dying suddenly in a strange place, surrounded by machines and strangers. Maybe something of her lingered, confused, not ready to leave. Maybe she was trying to find her way back to the scan she never got to have. I don't know. All I know is that 3 rational, level-headed healthcare professionals saw something impossible that night. Something that shouldn't have been there. Something that has changed how I view the world. I still work at the hospital. I still operate the MRI machine. I still consider myself a person of science. But now I leave a light on when I sleep, and I never, ever stay late in the imaging department alone. Sometimes I think I hear the sound of squeaky wheels in empty corridors, and every time I find myself holding my breath, afraid to look up and see that wild, disheveled hair and those vacant eyes staring back at me. Story 15. I still get chills when I think about that night in Jake's old house during lockdown. This happened in the winter of 2020, when we were all going stir-crazy from being cooped up inside for months. Jake had been renting this amazing place in Chicago for dirt cheap, only $500 a month for a 3-bedroom, 2-story house built sometime in the 20s or 30s. It was one of those beautiful old buildings with hardwood floors throughout, high ceilings and tons of character. But from the first time I visited, something about it just felt off. I can't explain it exactly. The house wasn't creepy in an obvious way. It was actually really nice, the kind of place that would normally go for at least $2,000 in that neighborhood. But there was this weight to the air inside, like the atmosphere was just a little too thick. I always felt like I needed to look over my shoulder when I was there. The basement was especially weird. It had this old coal chute, which I guess makes sense for a house that old. But it was just one of those reminders that the place had seen a lot of history. And there was this strange garage space built underneath the front porch that Jake used for storage. Just odd little features that made you wonder about who had lived there before and what might have happened in those rooms. That night, I drove over to hang out with Jake and our friend Chris. It was around 8 o'clock, freezing cold outside with that biting Chicago wind. I remember stomping snow off my boots in the entryway, the old floorboards creaking under my feet. Jake greeted me with a beer, and we hung out in the living room for a while, just talking and catching up. After about an hour, Chris suggested we smoke, and since Jake didn't allow smoking inside the main house, his landlord was pretty strict about that, we headed down to the basement. I hadn't had anything to smoke or drink yet besides that one beer, so I was completely clear-headed as we walked down those narrow wooden stairs that groaned with every step. The basement wasn't finished. Concrete floors, exposed pipes running along the ceiling, bare bulbs providing dim lighting. Jake had set up a little area with some folding chairs and a small table where we could hang out. It was chilly down there and I kept my jacket on. I remember the sound of the heating system kicking on, these loud metallic pops and bangs that echoed through the space. We sat in a circle, Jake to my left, Chris to my right. Jake started rolling up and I was just looking around, taking in the basement. There was a doorway across from where I was sitting that led to another section of the basement, a darker area where Jake kept some storage boxes and old furniture. The doorway didn't have an actual door, just a dark opening. When Jake finished rolling, he passed it to Chris, who took a hit and then held it out for me. I reached forward to grab it, and as I was leaning back into my chair, I saw something over Chris's shoulder in that doorway. It's hard to describe exactly what I saw. It wasn't solid, more like a misty, transparent shape, but it definitely had a human form, at least the torso and arms. I couldn't make out a head or feet, just this cloudy outline of a person's upper body. It was there for maybe half a second, just hovering in the doorway. My body reacted before my mind could process what I was seeing. I flinched hard, nearly dropping the blunt, and I remember my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. "Holy shit, did you guys see that?" I blurted out, pointing toward the doorway. Jake and Chris both turned around, looking confused. "See what?" Jake asked, squinting toward the dark doorway. "There was, I don't know, something there, like a shadow or something," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the adrenaline rushing through me. Chris laughed. "Dude, you haven't even smoked yet and you're already seeing things." They both looked at me like I was crazy, and I realized neither of them had been facing that direction. From where they were sitting, they wouldn't have been able to see into that doorway at all. "Never mind," I muttered, trying to play it off. Probably just my eyes playing tricks on me. But I knew what I'd seen. It wasn't my imagination or a trick of the light. There had been something there, something that shouldn't exist. I felt this overwhelming sensation of being watched, like whatever I'd seen was still there, just out of sight, observing us. I tried to act normal as we passed the blunt around, but I couldn't stop myself from glancing at that doorway every few seconds. The feeling of being watched didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. The air felt heavier, colder, and I swear the lights seemed to dim slightly, though neither Jake nor Chris mentioned it. Every little sound in that basement suddenly seemed significant. The ticking of pipes, the distant hum of the furnace, even the sound of our own breathing. I kept thinking I heard something else too, like the softest shuffling from the other room, but whenever I listened closely, there was nothing. After what felt like forever but was probably only about 20 minutes, I suggested we head back upstairs. I made some excuse about being cold, and thankfully, the others agreed. As we got up to leave, I let Jake and Chris go up the stairs first. I didn't want to turn my back on that doorway. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, some instinct made me look back one last time. The doorway was just as empty as it had been since that brief moment when I'd seen whatever it was. But as I put my foot on the first step, the bare bulb hanging in the center of the basement flickered once, twice, and then steadied again. It was probably nothing, old wiring in an old house, but it felt deliberate, like a goodbye or a warning. Upstairs, the atmosphere was completely different, warm, normal, safe. We watched a movie, ordered pizza, and I tried to forget about what had happened downstairs, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone in that house. Around midnight, I made up an excuse about having to work early the next day and left. Walking to my car, I looked back at Jake's house. All the windows were lit up warmly except for one small window at ground level, the basement window. It was pitch black, darker somehow than the night around it. I didn't bring it up again until about a month later. I was over at Jake's place, just the two of us hanging out, when I finally got up the courage to ask, "Hey, have you ever seen anything weird in this house? Like, I don't know, unexplainable stuff?" Jake's reaction told me everything I needed to know. He tensed up immediately. his eyes flicking briefly toward the hallway that led to the basement door. "No," he said too quickly. "Why? What kind of weird stuff?" "I don't know," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just that night we were smoking in the basement with Chris, I thought I saw something, like a shadow or something." "It's an old house," Jake said, standing up abruptly. "Probably just shadows from the streetlights or something. You want another beer?" He changed the subject so fast and so deliberately that I knew he was hiding something, but I didn't press him on it. The look in his eyes when I mentioned it, this flash of genuine fear, made me not want to know what he might have experienced in that house. The strangest part of this whole story is that less than a year later, when his lease was up, Jake moved out. He never gave a clear reason why he'd leave such an incredibly cheap place, especially in Chicago where rent is insane. He just said it was time for a change. He never even complained about the house before that, but something made him decide not to renew his lease on a 3-bedroom house that cost only $500 a month. It's been 3 years since that night, and I still can't explain what I saw. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a weird reflection, a shadow from outside, or just my eyes adjusting to the dim light. But none of those explanations feel right. What I saw had form, had presence. It was there, watching us, and I'm certain of it. I'm not someone who believes in ghosts or the paranormal. At least I wasn't before that night. But sometimes I still dream about that misty figure in the doorway, and I wake up with that same feeling of being watched. And in those moments between sleep and wakefulness, I'm absolutely certain that whatever I saw in Jake's basement is still there, waiting in that dark doorway, watching whoever lives in that house now. Story 16. I've never told this story publicly before. Even now, typing this out, my hands are shaking, but I need to get this off my chest because it's been eating away at me for years, and maybe someone here will understand or have experienced something similar. When I was 14, my mom remarried, and we moved to Nyssa, Oregon, to live with my new stepdad and his 2 sons. I wasn't thrilled about it. New town, new family, new everything. But what choice did I have? The house we moved into was this old place, built sometime in the early 1900s. From the street, it looked like a single-story house, nothing special really, just this faded yellow paint and a porch that sagged in the middle. But when you pulled into the driveway, you could see it actually had this partially sunken basement with small windows peeking out at ground level. The inside was pretty standard: living room with this ancient floral patterned couch, a kitchen with peeling linoleum, a dining room, 3 bedrooms, which meant I had to share with my youngest stepbrother, and 1 bathroom for all 5 of us. The basement was this huge open space filled with junk from whoever lived there before. Old furniture covered in sheets, boxes of who knows what, and this weird musty smell that never went away no matter how many air fresheners my mom plugged in. But the strangest part of the house was this washroom off the kitchen. It had an old-fashioned wringer washer, which we never used because we had a modern one in the basement, and these worn wooden stairs leading down to a cellar. Not the basement, a separate cellar. The first time I went down there, I nearly had a panic attack. The ceiling was so low I had to hunch over, and the walls were just earth and stone. The whole space was filled with stacks and stacks of newspapers, some from as far back as the 1930s. My stepdad said the previous owners must have been collectors, but it seemed more like hoarding to me. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. Well, as normal as living with a new family in a strange town could be. I spent most of my time at school or holed up in my room, trying to avoid my stepbrothers, who were honestly kind of jerks. It was about a month after we moved in when I saw something. I was doing dishes after dinner, everyone else was watching TV in the living room, and I heard the creak of someone coming up the cellar stairs. I figured it was my stepdad. He'd gone down there earlier looking for some tool or other, so I didn't turn around right away. But then I felt this presence, like when you know someone's staring at you. I turned, and there was a man standing in the doorway between the washroom and kitchen. He was just watching me, not moving, not speaking, just staring. He was wearing clothes that looked old-fashioned, like something from an old photograph. dark pants, suspenders, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His face was blurry somehow, like when you move during a photo. I blinked, and he was gone, just gone. I dropped the plate I was washing. It shattered on the floor, and everyone came running. I told my mom what I'd seen, but she said it was probably just my stepdad, and I'd imagined the rest because I was tired. But I know what I saw, and I know my stepdad was sitting next to her on the couch when I screamed. That night, I couldn't sleep. My stepbrother was snoring in the bed across the room, but that's not what kept me awake. It was the footsteps, slow, measured footsteps pacing up and down the hallway outside our bedroom, back and forth, back and forth. Then they'd stop, right in front of this huge painting of Crater Lake that hung in the hallway between the bedrooms. The painting had been there when we moved in, this dark, moody depiction of the lake at sunset or sunrise. I could never tell which. It was massive, maybe 4 feet wide, in this heavy gilt frame that looked like it weighed a ton. My mom wanted to take it down, but my stepdad insisted it was part of the house's character. I hated that painting. Something about it always made me uneasy, like the lake in it was too deep, too dark, like it could swallow you whole if you looked at it too long. The footsteps became a regular thing, always at night, always stopping at the painting. I tried to tell my mom, but she said it was just the house settling or my stepbrothers getting up to use the bathroom, but they never heard it. No one did but me. About 2 months after we moved in, I got sick. Really sick. High fever. Couldn't keep anything down. So weak, I could barely stand. The doctor said it was some kind of viral infection and prescribed bed rest. So there I was, stuck in bed while everyone else went about their lives, school, work, whatever. On the 3rd day of my illness, I needed to use the bathroom. Everyone was out, so I dragged myself out of bed. I was so dizzy, the hallway seemed to tilt and sway around me. As I passed the Crater Lake painting, I felt this pull, like something was tugging at me, drawing me toward it. I stopped and stared at it, and for a second, just a split second, I could have sworn the lake rippled like something was moving beneath the surface. Then everything went black. When I came to, the painting had fallen off the wall and was lying on top of me. The glass had shattered, and there were tiny cuts all over my arms. But that's not what scared me. What scared me was the woman kneeling beside me. She was Asian, maybe Japanese or Chinese, I couldn't tell, with long black hair pulled back in a bun. She was wearing a plain dress that looked like something from an old movie. But the worst part was her neck. There was this horrible wound there, like someone had, I don't even want to say it. She was trying to tell me something, her mouth moving frantically, but no sound came out. Just this horrible rasping noise, like air escaping from a puncture. I must have passed out again because the next thing I knew, my mom was shaking me awake, freaking out about the broken glass and the blood. I tried to tell her about the woman, but she just thought I was delirious from the fever. Maybe I was, but I don't think so. After that, I became obsessed with those newspapers in the cellar. I don't know why, but something told me they held answers. Every chance I got, when everyone was out or asleep, I'd sneak down there with a flashlight and start going through them. Most were just ordinary small-town news, farm reports, church socials, that kind of thing. But then I found some from 1941 and 42, right after Pearl Harbor. There were articles about the Japanese families living in the area, how they were being relocated to internment camps. There were angry letters to the editor about enemy aliens and national security. And there were smaller articles tucked away on back pages about vandalism at Asian-owned businesses, about families disappearing in the night, about a fire at a boarding house where several Japanese farm workers lived. No bodies were found, the paper said, but there was evidence of occupancy at the time of the fire. I was in the cellar reading these when I heard them for the first time. Voices speaking in what I now know was Japanese, coming from the basement. Not the cellar where I was, but the main basement under the house. They were whispering, urgent, afraid. I froze, paralyzed with terror as the voices grew louder, more frantic. Then I saw it. Through the tiny window connecting the cellar to the basement, a window I'd never noticed before, I saw something moving across the basement ceiling. Not walking, not crawling, skittering like an insect, but huge, human-sized. It moved in jerky, unnatural bursts, stopping occasionally to, God, I don't know how to describe it, to taste the air, I guess, like it was searching for something, hunting. I pressed myself against the wall, not daring to breathe. The voices had stopped. There was just silence and that thing moving closer to the cellar door. I heard scratching on the other side, like nails or claws dragging across the wood. Then a thump, like a body falling. I don't remember how I got out of there. My next clear memory is sitting on my bed, shaking uncontrollably as dawn broke outside my window. I started researching the history of Nisa after that. The town library had archives of local history, and I spent hours there learning about the Japanese and Chinese immigrants who'd come to work the sugar beet fields in the early 1900s. There had been a thriving Asian community in the area once, but it had mostly vanished during World War II. Some families were sent to internment camps, others just left or disappeared. I never went back into that cellar or the basement if I could help it. But the woman, the ghost, I guess, I saw her again and again, always trying to tell me something, always unable to speak because of that wound. Sometimes she'd point at the Crater Lake painting, sometimes at the cellar door. Once, I found her standing over me while I slept, tears streaming down her face. We only lived in that house for 7 months. My mom and stepdad's marriage fell apart, not because of the ghosts, he was cheating, and we moved back to my grandma's place in Idaho. I never told anyone else what I saw or heard in that house. But here's the thing that still haunts me. I think those spirits in the basement were hiding. Hiding from that thing I saw skittering across the ceiling. I think something terrible happened in that house, something connected to those missing families mentioned in the newspapers, and I think that woman was trying to warn me about it, or maybe ask for help, but I'll never know for sure. And sometimes, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I still hear those footsteps in the hallway, still feel that painting watching me, still see that woman with the wounded throat trying desperately to speak. Story 17. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened 3 days ago. I keep replaying it in my head, trying to find some logical explanation, but there isn't one. I need to get this off my chest, even if no one believes me. I've been a single dad to my daughter Lily for about 2 years now. She's 6, full of energy and imagination like most kids her age. We live in a pretty normal suburban house, 3 bedrooms, 2 stories, nothing special or historic about it. Lily's mom and I split up when she was 4, and while it was rough at first, we've settled into a good routine. Tuesday started like any other day. I work from home most weekdays, which lets me be around for Lily after school. She got home around 3:30 in the afternoon, had her snack, and then went upstairs to play with her Legos in the living room. It's her favorite thing to do after school. She'll spend hours building these elaborate little worlds. Our house has this weird layout where the upstairs living room is directly above the kitchen. I was sitting at the kitchen table working on my laptop, answering emails and finishing up some spreadsheets. One of the things I've gotten used to as a parent is always having one ear tuned to what my kid is doing. So while I was working, I could clearly hear Lily upstairs, talking to herself in that way kids do when they're deep in their imaginary games. I could hear the distinct sound of her digging through the Lego bin, the plastic pieces clicking together as she built. From where I was sitting, I had a clear view of the hallway between the bottom of the stairs and my home office door. I couldn't see the stairs themselves because of the wall, just the hallway that connects to them. It was around 4:15 when I heard footsteps on the stairs, not running or stomping, just normal footsteps coming down. I didn't think much of it. Lily probably needed something from downstairs. I glanced up from my laptop just in time to see what I thought was Lily walk past the hallway and into my office. I only caught a glimpse of the back of her head, her shoulder-length brown hair, the purple shirt she was wearing that day. Nothing seemed off in that moment. I went back to my emails figuring she was grabbing some colored paper or markers from my desk. She does that sometimes. Not even 30 seconds later, I heard more footsteps coming down the stairs. These were louder, more deliberate. I looked up confused because I thought Lily was already in the office. and there she was, walking down the hallway, heading toward the office. My daughter, Lily, in her purple shirt, carrying Lego creations in both hands. She looked exactly like herself, completely normal, smiling as she saw me. "Dad, look what I made," she said, holding up what looked like some kind of spaceship or vehicle made of colorful bricks. I felt my blood run cold. I couldn't speak for a moment. If Lily was just now coming down the stairs, then who or what had I seen walk into the office seconds before? "Lily," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady, "is there someone else upstairs?" She looked at me with that confused expression kids get when adults ask weird questions. "No, Daddy, just me." I stood up so quickly I knocked my chair over. "Stay here," I told her, trying not to scare her with how freaked out I suddenly was. I walked to the office doorway and looked inside. There was no one there, just my desk, computer, bookshelf, and the usual clutter. I checked behind the door, under the desk, in the closet, all the places a child might hide. Nothing. The office has only one door, the one I was standing in. There are 2 windows, but they were both closed and locked from the inside. There was absolutely nowhere someone could have gone. I walked back to Lily, who was now putting her Lego creation on the kitchen counter. "Lily, were you just in the office a minute ago, before you came downstairs with your Legos?" She shook her head. "No, I was upstairs the whole time. I just came down now to show you what I built." "You didn't come down, go to the office, and then go back upstairs really fast?" "No, Daddy." She was starting to look worried now. "Are you mad at me?" No, sweetheart, I'm not mad at all." I forced a smile and tried to act normal as I looked at her Lego creation. "This is really cool. Tell me about it." As she explained her spaceship car hybrid thing, my mind was racing. I know what I saw. Something that looked exactly like my daughter from behind had walked into my office seconds before the real Lily came downstairs. The timing made it impossible for her to have done both. She couldn't have gone into the office, somehow sneaked past me back to the stairs, gone up and come back down in less than 30 seconds, and I would have seen her leave the office. After Lily went back upstairs, I searched the entire house. Every room, every closet, under every bed. I checked all the windows and doors to make sure they were locked. Everything was secure. There was no sign that anyone else had been in our house. The rest of the evening I was on edge. I kept Lily close to me, made dinner, helped with her bath, and read her extra stories at bedtime. I didn't want to scare her, but I also didn't want her out of my sight. Every noise made me jump. I kept seeing movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I'd turned to look, nothing was there. As I was tucking Lily in, something she said made my skin crawl. "Daddy, is my friend going to play with me again tomorrow?" I froze. "What friend, sweetheart?" "The girl who looks like me. She was in your office today." I tried to keep my voice steady. "When did you see her?" "I didn't see her, but I know she was there." Lily yawned, already half asleep. "She's been here before." "What do you mean she's been here before?" But Lily was drifting off to sleep. I sat there in her room for a long time, watching her sleep peacefully while my mind was in turmoil. It brought back memories I'd tried hard to forget. When Lily was around 2 or 3, she used to do this thing that creeped me out. After naps or in the mornings, she would wave at her closet and say, "Bye-bye," as if someone was in there. Kids do weird stuff, so I tried not to read too much into it. But it always unsettled me. And now this. The thing is, I have my own history with this kind of stuff. When I was around Lily's age, maybe a bit older, we lived in a house that my parents eventually moved out of because of what they called shadow people. I remember seeing dark figures moving around my room at night. My parents thought it was just nightmares until they started seeing them too. I never told Lily any of this. She wouldn't know about my childhood experiences. So why is she experiencing something similar? That night, I barely slept. I kept getting up to check on Lily, to make sure she was alone in her room. I'd stand in the doorway, watching the shadows, looking for any movement. Every creak of the house settling made me tense up. The next morning, when Lily was eating breakfast, I casually asked her about her friend. Can you tell me more about the girl who looks like you? Lily shrugged, mouth full of cereal. After swallowing, she said, "She's just a girl. She follows me sometimes." "Does she talk to you?" "No, she just watches me. Sometimes she plays with my toys when I'm not in my room." "How do you know that?" "Because they're not where I left them." She said it so matter-of-factly, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Does she scare you?" I asked carefully. Lily thought about it for a moment. "No. She's sad, I think. She wants to play, but she doesn't know how to ask." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as an imaginary friend. But after what I saw, I couldn't. I've spent the last 3 days on edge, watching, waiting, wondering if I'll see it again. I've been researching doppelgangers, spirits, all kinds of paranormal phenomena. Some cultures believe seeing your double is an omen of death. Others think they're protective spirits. I don't know what to believe. All I know is what I saw. A perfect copy of my daughter walking into my office and then vanishing. And now I'm terrified about what it means for Lily. Is she in danger? Am I? Or is this entity, whatever it is, just lonely, like Lily suggests? I'm writing this at my kitchen table, the same spot where it all happened. Lily is upstairs playing again. Every few minutes I stop typing to listen, making sure I can still hear her moving around up there. I'm afraid of hearing footsteps on the stairs. I'm afraid of seeing her, or not her, walk past again. What do you do when your child has a double? How do you protect them from something you can't understand or fight? I haven't told anyone else about this. They'd think I was crazy or hallucinating. Maybe I am. But I know what I saw. And now I'm wondering if those shadow people from my childhood have somehow found me again, found us, and if they've taken a new form to try to connect with my daughter. I just heard footsteps on the stairs. Story 18. I still remember the day I messed up, really messed up. I was 11, living with my mom's stepdad, 2 brothers and stepsister in this old house on Maple Street. We'd been there about 8 months, and from the beginning, there was something off about it. Not the usual creaky floors or drafty windows kind of off. Something worse. My brothers were always ignoring me. Jake was 14 and thought he was too cool to hang out with his little sister, and Ethan was 16 and basically lived in his headphones. That particular Saturday, my parents had gone grocery shopping, leaving us home alone. My stepsister Carrie was at her mom's for the weekend. She was always finding excuses to be away from our house, and honestly, I couldn't blame her. Mom had left me a list of chores, including mopping the living room floor. I was annoyed because the boys didn't have to do anything. As I dragged the mop across the floor, something made me look up toward the cellar door. That's when I saw it for the first time. It was hanging above the doorway like a shadow, but not attached to anything, just clinging to the ceiling. It didn't have a clear shape. More like a dark mass with these wispy edges that moved even though there wasn't any breeze. And I swear it was watching me. I could feel it. I froze, the mop handle slipping from my sweaty hands and clattering to the floor. The thing didn't move, but somehow I knew it was aware of me. I'd seen weird shadows in the house before, especially around the basement and cellar, but never this clearly, never this intentional. "Jake, Ethan!" I screamed, but the TV was blaring in the den and they couldn't hear me, or were ignoring me. I was terrified to move, afraid that if I took my eyes off it, it would, I don't know, drop down on me or something. I finally backed away slowly, not turning my back on it, and ran to the den where my brothers were playing video games. "There's something weird by the cellar door," I said, tugging on Jake's sleeve. "Please, come look." "Go away, Amy," Jake muttered, shrugging me off. "We're in the middle of a game." "I'm serious. There's something there." My voice was getting higher, panic rising in my chest. "It's just your imagination," Ethan said without even looking at me. "Go finish your chores before Mom gets back." I stood there, getting angrier by the second. They never believed me, never took me seriously. The fear mixed with frustration until I couldn't think straight. That's when I had the stupidest idea of my life. I stormed into the kitchen, yanked open the drawer, and grabbed one of Mom's steak knives, the one with the black handle that could cut through anything. I marched back to the den, knife in hand. "If you guys don't come right now, I swear I'll hurt myself," I announced, holding the knife up. That got their attention. Both boys turned to look at me, game controllers still in their hands. "What the hell, Amy?" Ethan stood up. "Put that down before you hurt yourself." "That's the point." I was shaking now, tears starting to form. "Nobody ever listens to me in this house. There's something by the cellar and I'm scared and you don't care," Jake scoffed. "You're just trying to get attention. You're too chicken to actually do anything with that knife." Something in me snapped when he said that. I was tired of being the scared little girl, tired of being ignored. Without thinking, God, I wish I had thought, I slammed the knife down through my left hand, right between my thumb and index finger. There was this weird moment where I didn't feel anything, just saw the blade sticking through my hand on the coffee table. Then the pain hit and blood started pooling around my hand, dripping onto the carpet. My brothers freaked out. Ethan knocked over the coffee table, rushing to me, and Jake ran to call 911. I was in shock, staring at my hand, suddenly forgetting all about the shadow thing by the cellar. But when they were wrapping my hand in a towel, waiting for the ambulance, I glanced toward the living room. The shadow was gone from above the cellar door. I felt relieved for about 2 seconds, until I saw it sliding across the living room wall, moving freely now, no longer confined to the doorway. That's when I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. The hospital visit was a blur of stitches, tetanus shots, and worried faces. My parents were furious and terrified at the same time. The doctors wanted me to talk to a psychiatrist, but I just kept saying it was an accident. I couldn't tell them the truth, that I'd done it to prove a point to my brothers, and I definitely couldn't tell anyone about the shadow thing. When we got home late that night, the house felt different, heavier somehow. Mom made me sleep in their room that night, probably worried I'd hurt myself again, but I wasn't thinking about that anymore. I was thinking about the shadow I'd seen moving across the wall. The next morning I saw it again. This time it was in the hallway bathroom, hovering in the corner of the shower while I brushed my teeth. I dropped my toothbrush and ran out, but when I dragged my mom in to look, it was gone. "Amy, honey, you need to stop this," Mom said, looking more tired than usual. "There's nothing here." But there was. And over the next few days, I started seeing it everywhere in the house, no longer just by the cellar, but in my bedroom, the kitchen, even outside my window at night. Sometimes it was just a dark smudge in the corner of my eye, but other times it would take more shape, like a hunched figure with long, stretchy limbs. A week after the knife incident, I saw it at school. I was sitting in math class when I noticed it clinging to the ceiling in the back corner. I screamed so loud the teacher sent me to the nurse, who called my mom to pick me up. It followed me to school, I whispered to her in the car. Mom gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Amy, please. The doctor said you might have some issues to work through, but there's nothing following you." But there was, and it was getting worse. A month after the incident, our whole family was falling apart. Mom and Rick, my stepdad, were fighting constantly. Carrie was staying at her mom's more and more. My brothers were jumpy and irritable. Even our dog, Beggar, was acting weird, growling at empty corners and refusing to go into certain rooms. I started having these intense headaches and nosebleeds. Weird bruises showed up on my arms and legs that I couldn't explain. I was always tired, no matter how much I slept. The doctor said it might be anemia and gave me iron pills, but they didn't help. The worst part was that nobody believed me when I told them about the shadow. They thought I was making it up for attention, or that I was having some kind of breakdown after the knife incident, but I knew what I was seeing. One night, about 2 months after it all started, I woke up to find it standing at the foot of my bed. Not just a shadow anymore, but something more solid, with these glowing pinpricks where eyes should be. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It just stood there, watching me, for what felt like hours before melting into the darkness. The next morning we found Beggar whimpering in the backyard with a deep gash on his side. The vet said it looked like he'd been cut with something sharp, but there was nothing in our yard that could have done it. I knew it was the shadow thing. It was hurting the things I loved. By the 6-month mark, Rick had moved his bedroom down to the basement. He claimed it was because Mom snored, but I knew better. The shadow thing was driving us all apart. Whenever any of us left the house, it was like this weight lifted off our shoulders, like we could breathe again. But as soon as we came back, that heaviness returned. I saw it on the school bus, in friends' houses when I visited, even at the mall when Mom took me shopping. It was always there, watching, following. Sometimes it would get closer, reaching out with those wispy limbs like it wanted to touch me. My teachers started calling home because my grades were dropping. I couldn't concentrate. I was always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for it to appear. I lost weight, my hair started falling out, and I had these constant dark circles under my eyes that wouldn't go away no matter how much I slept. One night, about 9 months after the knife incident, I woke up to find Rick standing in my doorway, just staring at me. His eyes looked weird, unfocused. "Rick," I whispered, sitting up. He didn't answer, just kept staring. Then he slowly raised his hand and pointed behind me. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. When I turned, the shadow was there, right above my headboard, its form more defined than ever before. When I whipped back around, Rick was gone. The next morning, he didn't remember coming to my room at all. Things got even worse after that. Mom started finding small dead animals on our porch, birds with broken necks, mice laid out in neat rows. Rick would wake up with scratches on his back that he couldn't explain. Jake started sleepwalking, ending up in the cellar in the middle of the night with no memory of how he got there. And me? I was wasting away. My skin turned this sickly grayish color. My hair became brittle and dull. The bruises kept appearing, darker and more frequent. I'd wake up with my sheets soaked in sweat, my throat raw from screaming in my sleep. I knew what was happening. When I stabbed my hand that day, my blood had somehow set the thing loose. It had been confined to the cellar before, but my blood, my stupid, impulsive action, had freed it. And now it was feeding off me, off my family, off our fear and misery. Almost exactly a year after the incident, I woke up in the middle of the night to find my entire family standing around my bed. Mom, Rick, Jake, Ethan, even Carrie, who had come for the weekend. They were all just standing there staring at me with those same unfocused eyes Rick had had that night. "What's happening?" I whispered, pulling my blanket up to my chin. None of them answered. They just kept staring. Then, as one, they all raised their arms and pointed behind me. I didn't need to look. I could feel it there, larger than ever, pressing down on me, sucking the air from the room. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for morning to come. When I opened them again, everyone was gone, back in their beds as if nothing had happened. The next day, Mom announced we were moving. Just like that, she'd found a rental on the other side of town, and we were leaving as soon as possible. Nobody argued. We all wanted out. We left most of our furniture behind, packing only what would fit in our cars. As we drove away, I looked back at the house one last time. I swear I saw something in the upstairs window, my window, watching us leave. I thought moving would solve everything, that we'd escape the shadow thing and our lives would go back to normal. But as we pulled up to our new house, I felt that familiar heaviness settle over me. I wish I could say things got better after we left. They didn't. The next house wasn't much better, but that's another story. All I know is that on that day when I was 11, I let something out that should have stayed trapped, something that's been with me ever since. And sometimes even now, I wake up in the middle of the night and see those pinprick eyes watching me from the darkest corner of my room. Story 19. I still don't know how to explain what happened in our house in Pinewood. 8 years we lived there, and I'm still trying to make sense of it. I've never been so relieved as when we first moved in. A brand new house through the housing program. Everything fresh and clean and, most importantly, free from the awful spiritual presence that had terrorized us in our old place. That other ghost had been human-shaped, angry, and downright terrifying. It would slam doors, mess with the electricity, and once even pushed my little sister down the stairs. We were desperate to escape. When we first moved to Pinewood, I thought we'd finally left all that supernatural stuff behind. The house smelled like new paint and carpet. Nothing had died there, no history, no baggage. For the first few weeks, I actually slept through the night without jerking awake in terror. My mom stopped looking exhausted all the time. My sister stopped having nightmares. But about a month after we moved in, I started noticing something, not like before. This wasn't human-shaped or angry. This was different. The first time I saw it was a Tuesday night. I remember because I had a big test the next day and had been studying late. It was around 11 at night, and I was heading to the bathroom to brush my teeth. We had 2 cats at the time, Luna, who was orange and white, and Shadow, a dark gray cat. I thought Shadow was following me down the hallway. I could see this dark shape out of the corner of my eye, padding along behind me. I turned around to pet him, but when I looked, there was nothing there. I figured he'd just ducked into one of the bedrooms, so I didn't think much of it. I went into the bathroom, turned on the light, and started brushing my teeth. That's when I saw it in the mirror, a dark gray cat-shaped shadow sitting in the doorway behind me, watching me. I turned around thinking it was Shadow, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, the shape was still there, just sitting and watching. My heart started pounding. I blinked hard and looked again. The shape was still there, but as I stared, it sort of zipped away, like someone had hit fast forward on a video. It didn't run like a normal cat. It moved way too fast, shooting down the hallway and vanishing. I was so freaked out that I finished brushing my teeth in record time and practically ran back to my bedroom. I told myself I was just tired, that my eyes were playing tricks on me, but I knew what I'd seen. The next morning I was eating breakfast when my mom mentioned something weird. "I saw the strangest thing last night," she said, pouring herself coffee. "I could have sworn I saw a ghost cat in my room." My spoon froze halfway to my mouth. "What do you mean, a ghost cat?" I was reading in bed and I saw this dark shape like a cat walking across my floor. I thought it was Shadow, but when I called to him, he was already asleep on the end of my bed. This other cat thing kind of changed shape and slipped under my bed. When I looked underneath, there was nothing there. I told her what I'd seen in the bathroom. We both tried to laugh it off, but I could tell she was as unsettled as I was. Over the next few weeks, we kept seeing it. Not every day, but often enough that we couldn't just ignore it. The weirdest part was that visitors would ask about our 3rd cat. Friends would come over and say things like, "Oh, I didn't know you got another cat," or "I just saw a black cat run down the hallway." My sister's friend once refused to go back to her room because she said there was a black cat hiding in the closet. When my sister checked, the closet was empty, and both our real cats were napping in the living room. One night I was doing homework in my room when I felt something jump onto my bed. I automatically reached out to pet whichever cat it was, but my hand found nothing. The mattress hadn't even moved or depressed like it would if an actual cat had jumped up. Yet I'd felt it, that distinct sensation of a cat landing on the bed. I looked around, and there was no cat in my room at all. After about 2 months of these experiences, we finally had a family meeting about it. My sister admitted she'd been seeing it too, sometimes in her room, sometimes in the hallway. She described seeing what looked like Shadow walking past her door, but when she went to check, Shadow was outside in the backyard. "It's not mean or anything," my sister said. "It's just there, watching us." That was the creepiest part for me, the watching. It never tried to interact with us. It just observed, like it was studying our habits and routines. We started calling it Chintz. The name came from my mom, who said that sometimes when she caught sight of it, it didn't look fully formed like a cat. It would be more like a piece of dark cloth or fabric moving around. Chintz is a type of fabric, so the name stuck. The appearances continued, becoming almost normal for us. We'd be sitting in the living room and see a dark shape dart under the couch. One of us would just say, "Chintz is active tonight," and we'd go on with whatever we were doing. But there were still moments that chilled me to the bone, like the time I was home alone, studying for finals. It was completely quiet in the house when I heard the distinctive sound of cat paws running full speed across the hardwood floor in the hallway. That frantic skittering noise cats make when they're having what we called the zoomies. Both our cats were outside and I was completely alone in the house. Or the night I woke up at 3 in the morning to find what looked like a cat silhouette sitting on my dresser, perfectly still, watching me. When I turned on my lamp, there was nothing there. My friend Kelly stayed over once and woke me up in the middle of the night, freaked out because she said she'd felt a cat walking on her legs in the sleeping bag, but when she sat up to pet it, there was nothing there. I hadn't told her about Chintz. We tried to come up with explanations. Maybe it was a neighborhood cat that had died and found a new family to haunt. Maybe it was somehow connected to the land the house was built on. We even wondered if it had followed us from our old house, though it felt nothing like the angry presence we'd escaped from. Whatever Chintz was, it didn't seem malevolent. Creepy, yes. Unsettling, definitely. But not evil or threatening. It was just there. After about a year, the sightings became less frequent. We'd go weeks without anyone mentioning Chintz, but it never completely went away. Sometimes I'd feel the phantom weight of a cat jumping onto my bed at night. Sometimes my mom would mention seeing a shadow dart across the floor, but it became background noise in our lives, just another quirk of the house. Until about a month ago. We're preparing to move again. My mom got a job in another state, and we're packing up everything. And suddenly, Chintz is back in full force. I've seen it every day for the past 2 weeks, standing in doorways, sitting on top of packed boxes, watching me from empty shelves as I clear them out. Last night was the most intense experience yet. I was in my mostly empty room, just my bed and a few boxes left. I was taking down the last of my posters when I felt something brush against my legs. I looked down, expecting to see Luna or Shadow, but there was nothing there. Then I heard a soft meow from behind me. I turned around slowly. There, sitting in the middle of my floor, was a dark shadow in the perfect shape of a cat. It wasn't see-through like you'd expect a ghost to be. It was solid, but somehow darker than the darkest black I've ever seen, like a hole in reality shaped like a cat. It was staring right at me with what seemed like glowing eyes, though I couldn't make out any actual features. For the first time in 8 years, Chintz wasn't just appearing briefly or darting away. It was sitting there, deliberately making its presence known. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only about 30 seconds. Then it stood up, stretched like a normal cat would, and walked, not zipped or darted, but walked normally, toward my closet. It disappeared into the wall. I didn't sleep at all last night. The thing is, I don't feel threatened. I feel like Chintz doesn't want us to leave. Like it's grown attached to us over these 8 years and is trying to make itself known before we go. We're moving out tomorrow. I've packed up everything except what I need for tonight and tomorrow morning. I keep wondering if Chintz will follow us to the new house or if it's bound to this place. Part of me hopes it stays behind. The rational part that knows phantom cats aren't normal. But another part of me has grown used to our strange, shadowy housemate and would miss knowing it's around. I just heard something scratch at my door. Both our real cats are in the living room with my mom. I'm not going to open it. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. And right now, I just want to get through one more night in this house without completely freaking myself out. But I know Chintz is out there in the hallway, waiting, watching. And I don't know if it's saying goodbye or preparing to follow us to our new home. Story 20. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. Growing up in a pretty traditional Chinese-American family, we had our superstitions, sure, but I always chalked that up to cultural stuff my grandparents brought over, not anything real. But what happened to me last year in my grandfather's house in Oak Ridge has completely destroyed any certainty I had about, well, anything. It started small. Just trouble sleeping. I was 24, working a decent job in IT, and had moved in with my grandfather temporarily to help him out after my grandmother passed away. The house was this old 2-story place built in the 70s, all creaky floors and dated wallpaper. Nothing scary about it. I'd spent countless weekends there as a kid. The first week was fine. The second week, I started having what I thought was sleep paralysis. I'd wake up in the middle of the night completely frozen, unable to move a single muscle except my eyes. My heart would be racing, and I'd feel this pressure, like something heavy was sitting on my chest. The first few times I convinced myself it was normal. Sleep paralysis happens to lots of people, right? I'd read about it online, but then I started hearing things during these episodes. Not clear voices, more like whispers. Multiple voices talking over each other, just quiet enough that I couldn't make out what they were saying. I'd lie there completely paralyzed, listening to these voices for what felt like hours until I could finally move again. After about a month of this happening 2 or 3 times a week, I was a wreck. Dark circles under my eyes, jumping at every little sound. My coworkers started asking if I was okay. I wasn't. I was barely sleeping 4 hours a night, and even then it was broken up by these episodes. I finally broke down and told my grandfather about the sleep problems, though not about the voices. I didn't want him thinking I was losing it. He looked concerned and suggested I take his old bedroom downstairs while he stayed in the guest room. "Maybe change of room help you sleep better," he said in his broken English. That night in his room was the worst yet. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to that familiar paralysis. But this time the pressure was so intense I thought my ribs might crack, and the voices were louder, still unintelligible but angry. I swear I could feel breath on my face, like someone was right there, inches away, hissing these words at me. The next day I moved out, found a small apartment across town, and told my grandfather I needed to be closer to work. I felt guilty leaving him alone, but I couldn't take another night in that house. For a few weeks, things got better. The sleep paralysis stopped. I started sleeping through the night again. I thought maybe it had been stress or the old house's musty air or something. Then it started again, but different this time. I'd be lying in bed, completely awake, when I'd see these shadowy wisps floating around my room. Not solid shapes, more like dark smoke drifting across my ceiling. I'd blink hard, turn on the lights, and they'd be gone. But as soon as I turned the lights off and laid back down, they'd return. Then came the touching, light brushes against my arm or leg, a finger trailing down my back when I was alone in the shower. One night I distinctly felt someone sit down on the edge of my bed, the mattress depressing under invisible weight. I started keeping the lights on all night. I'd fall asleep with every lamp in my apartment blazing, only to wake up to find them all turned off. The first time it happened, I figured it was a power outage. The 5th time, I knew better. The worst night up to that point happened about 3 months after I'd moved out of my grandfather's. I was drifting off to sleep when I heard my sister's voice. Clear as day, she screamed, "Stop!" Then again, louder, "Stop!" And then a 3rd time, but this time her voice was distorted, deeper, like her voice was being digitally manipulated. "Stop!" The thing is, my sister lives in Chicago. She wasn't anywhere near me. I called her the next morning, hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the phone. She said she'd been asleep at the time I heard the voice. She hadn't had any nightmares, hadn't woken up, nothing unusual at all. I started inviting friends over to stay the night. Safety in numbers, right? None of them saw the shadows or heard the voices, but 3 different people told me independently that my apartment gave them bad vibes, and they felt like they were being watched. My roommate from college, who's about as skeptical as they come, stayed one night and left at 4 in the morning. When I texted to ask why, he just wrote back, "Something touched my face while I was sleeping." I was starting to think I was losing my mind. I got a full physical, had my doctor check for carbon monoxide in my apartment, even went to a psychiatrist who prescribed me some anti-anxiety meds that did absolutely nothing. 6 months after it all started, my grandparents went on a trip to visit relatives back in China. My grandfather asked if I would house sit, make sure the plants were watered and the mail collected. I almost said no, but it had been months since I'd experienced anything in that house. Maybe whatever it was had moved on. I reluctantly agreed. The first 2 nights were fine, quiet, peaceful even. I started to think I'd been working myself up over nothing. Then came the 3rd night. I woke up at exactly 3 in the morning. Not to paralysis this time, but to pain. searing, crushing pain in the center of my chest. It felt like something was trying to pull my heart right out through my rib cage. I tried to scream, but couldn't make a sound. I couldn't breathe. Black spots danced in my vision, and I think I passed out for a few seconds. When I came to, something was grabbing my face. I could feel fingers, cold, dry fingers, gripping my cheeks and chin, turning my head forcibly to the left. And there, in the darkness, I saw it, a figure, shadowy, indistinct but unmistakably female, and something else, something on its head. Horns? A crown? I couldn't tell in the dark, and my eyes were watering from the pain that was still radiating through my chest. I somehow managed to break free, lunging for the bedside lamp. When the light flooded the room, nothing was there. I sat up all night with every light in the house on, a kitchen knife in my hand, back pressed against the wall so nothing could sneak up behind me. As dawn approached, I started to calm down. Maybe it had been a particularly vivid nightmare. Maybe the chest pain was heartburn or a panic attack. I must have dozed off sitting there because I jolted awake to something bouncing on my stomach. I looked down and screamed. There, clear as day in the morning light, was what looked like a small girl in a white sheet, like a Halloween ghost costume, bouncing up and down on my midsection. Except it wasn't solid. I could see right through it. It was translucent, like looking through foggy glass. As I watched, frozen in terror, it turned what I assume was its head toward me. There were no visible features under the sheet, just emptiness. Then it vanished. Not gradually, but all at once, like someone had switched it off. A second later, I saw a visual distortion, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, move across the room and pass right through my TV screen, which flickered once before returning to normal. I was halfway out the door, car keys in hand, when I heard it. A female voice, crystal clear, whispered directly into my left ear, "Eric and Isabella, the greatest." I spun around. Nothing there. Then again, this time in my right ear, "I love you." I ran, got in my car and drove straight to a hotel where I stayed for 3 days until my grandparents returned. Here's the thing that still haunts me. I don't know anyone named Isabella who's died. I asked my family if there was an Isabella in our history, or an Eric. No one had heard those names before. I've since moved to another city entirely. I told everyone it was for a better job, but the truth is I couldn't stand being anywhere near that house or my apartment anymore. The experiences have mostly stopped in my new place. Mostly. Sometimes I still wake up to whispers. Sometimes I still see shadows moving when there's nothing there to cast them, but it's less frequent, less intense. I've tried researching what happened to me. Sleep paralysis doesn't explain the physical sensations or the voices other people heard. Carbon monoxide poisoning doesn't explain experiences happening in 2 different locations. Hallucinations don't explain my roommate feeling something touch his face. I don't know what was haunting me. I don't know why it followed me from my grandfather's house to my apartment. I don't know who Eric and Isabella are, or why whatever this thing was wanted me to know they were the greatest. All I know is that something was there with me, something that could touch me, move objects, turn off lights, something that knew my sister's voice, something that could appear as a translucent child bouncing on my stomach in broad daylight. I still sleep with the lights on. I still wake up sometimes feeling like someone's sitting on the edge of my bed, and I still have no explanation for any of it. Story 21. I never believed in anything supernatural before we moved to Clearwater. Looking back, I wish we'd never gone there, but when you're running from something worse, you don't always look too closely at where you're running to. Mom found the rental after we finally escaped my stepdad. The 3 of us, Mom, my brother Marcus and me, needed somewhere cheap and available immediately. The house in Clearwater was both, which should have been our first warning. When a place sits empty for that long in a housing shortage, there's usually a reason. I was 16 when we moved in. Marcus was 14. Mom had been saving in secret for months before we finally got away. The house was in a rough neighborhood, but Mom kept saying it was temporary, just until we got back on our feet. The landlord barely looked at our application before handing over the keys. He seemed almost desperate to rent it out. From day one, That place felt wrong. The air inside was heavy, like walking through invisible cobwebs. The layout was weird too. Narrow hallways that seemed to stretch longer than they should, doors that wouldn't close properly, light switches that did nothing. The electrical system was a mess. Lights would flicker without reason and sometimes turn on by themselves in empty rooms. I remember walking into my bedroom for the first time. It was small, with faded yellow wallpaper that was peeling at the corners. Someone had scratched messages into the walls, things like "Get out" and "This house is haunted," that the landlord had lazily painted over, but you could still see if you looked closely. Worst of all was the pentagram scratched into the floor under where my bed would go. Mom helped me move the bed to cover it, saying it was probably just some edgy teenager who lived there before. The first week I got really sick. At first, I thought it was just stress from the move and everything with my stepdad, but this was different. I'd get these waves of dizziness that would come out of nowhere, so bad I'd have to sit down wherever I was. Sometimes I'd feel like I couldn't breathe, like something was sitting on my chest. Mom was worried enough to call a gas company to check for carbon monoxide or gas leaks, but they found nothing. The sickness came and went, but it was always worse in my bedroom. I started sleeping on the couch because every time I tried to sleep in my room, I'd wake up feeling like I was being watched. The closet in my room was the worst. It wasn't even a proper closet, more like a small alcove with a curtain rod. I hated it from day one. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and the closet curtain would be moving, like someone had just brushed past it. I started pushing my dresser in front of it before bed, but somehow it would always be moved back by morning, not completely, just enough that the curtain was accessible again. One night, about 3 weeks after we moved in, I was taking a shower. Our bathroom had this small window high up on the wall that looked into the hallway. I always felt exposed in there, like someone was watching. As I was rinsing my hair, I got that feeling again. The heavy, sick feeling that something was in the bathroom with me. I opened my eyes and looked toward the door, which I always locked. Through the shower curtain, I could see a dark shape standing just outside, not moving, not doing anything, just standing there. I freaked out and called for Marcus, thinking it was him playing a prank. No answer. I grabbed my towel, still dripping wet, and yanked the curtain back. There was nothing there, but the bathroom door was wide open. I know I locked it. I know I did. I ran out into the hallway in just my towel, shouting for Marcus and Mom. They were both in the kitchen, helping unpack boxes. There's no way either of them could have been outside the bathroom and made it to the kitchen that fast. When I told Mom what happened, she looked worried but tried to play it off. Old houses settle, Elena. Doors open by themselves sometimes. But doors don't unlock themselves. The activity kept escalating. One night we were all in the kitchen when a glass cake pan flew off the counter and smashed against the wall on the opposite side of the room. Not fell, flew, like someone had picked it up and thrown it as hard as they could. We all saw it, and we all just stood there in shock. Mom tried to explain it away. Maybe it was sitting on something, maybe the counter was uneven, but we all knew what we saw. I started spending as much time as possible out of the house. I'd go to school early and stay late. I'd hang out at the library until closing time. Anything to avoid being in that house, especially alone. Marcus felt it too, though he wouldn't admit it. He'd always have an excuse to be out with friends or at basketball practice. The living room was the only place I felt somewhat safe. Maybe because we were usually all together there, or maybe whatever was in the house just wasn't as strong in that part of the building. I started sleeping on the couch permanently, telling Mom I could study better out there. She didn't push it. I think she knew something was wrong with the house too, but she didn't want to admit it. We'd already been through so much. The worst incident happened about 2 months after we moved in. My boyfriend at the time, Jake, was dropping me off after a date. We pulled up to the house, and as I was gathering my things, Jake suddenly went quiet. I looked up and saw him staring at my bedroom window on the second floor. "Who's that?" he asked. I looked up and felt my entire body go cold. There, in my bedroom window, was a perfectly round black mass, not a shadow, not a person. It was like a hole cut out of reality. It was darker than the darkness around it, and it seemed to be watching us. "That's my bedroom," I whispered. Jake, trying to be brave, said we should go check it out. We went inside, and Mom was asleep on the couch with the TV on. Marcus was at a friend's house. We crept upstairs, and Jake held my hand the whole way. When we opened my bedroom door, there was nothing there. The window was closed, the curtains were open, and the room was empty. But it was freezing cold, at least 20 degrees colder than the hallway. Jake left shortly after that. He never came back to my house again. Some nights I'd feel things touching me. I'd be half asleep on the couch and feel something tugging at my feet, like someone was trying to pull me off. I'd jerk awake and there would be nothing there, but the feeling of those invisible hands would linger. Our pets felt it too. We had 2 cats and a small dog when we moved in. One of the cats disappeared completely within the first month. We searched everywhere, put up posters, called animal shelters. It was like she vanished into thin air. The other cat became jumpy and would hiss at empty corners. Our dog, Buddy, who was normally the most easygoing animal you'd ever meet, became terrified of going upstairs. He'd plant his feet and whine if you tried to lead him up there, and if you carried him, he'd shake uncontrollably. One morning, I came downstairs to find all the kitchen cabinets open, every single one. Mom swore she hadn't done it, and Marcus was still asleep. It happened 3 more times that week. Things would go missing, then turn up in weird places. My hairbrush disappeared from the bathroom and showed up in the freezer. Marcus's homework vanished from his backpack, and we found it in the attic, a place none of us had even been yet. The noises were the most consistent thing. Footsteps when no one was moving, whispering that seemed to come from inside the walls. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear scratching, like someone was trying to claw their way out of the walls. Mom finally admitted something was wrong when she saw it herself. She'd been doing laundry in the basement, a dark, unfinished space that always smelled like mold. She came running upstairs, white as a sheet, saying she'd seen someone standing in the corner, a tall, dark figure that disappeared when she turned on the light. After that, she started doing laundry at the laundromat down the street. We didn't last much longer in that house. 3 months after moving in, Mom found another place. It was even smaller, even more expensive, but it didn't have that feeling. We moved out in a single day, leaving behind furniture and belongings we couldn't pack fast enough. I didn't even care. I just wanted out. Before we left, I went back to my room one last time to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything important. As I stood in the doorway, I felt something brush past me, like someone walking very close by. The air turned ice cold for just a second, and I heard a voice right in my ear whisper, "You'll be back." I ran out and never set foot in that house again. We never talked much about what happened in Clearwater. It was like we all silently agreed to pretend it never happened. But sometimes I'll catch Mom looking over her shoulder at nothing, or Marcus will wake up screaming from a nightmare he can't remember. Whatever was in that house, it wasn't just our imagination or leftover trauma from what happened with my stepdad. It was real, it was malicious, and sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still feel like it's watching me, waiting for me to come back. Aixua, Story 22. I was 9 years old at the time. My family had been going to Millfield Church my whole life. It was this huge old building that had been around since 1757. My parents were really involved there, so I basically grew up running through those hallways. I knew every corner of that place, or at least I thought I did. The church had this huge basement where we had Sunday school classes and youth group meetings. There were a bunch of different rooms down there, including this tiny prayer room right next to where the youth group met. It was nothing special, just a small room with a few chairs, a little altar, and a cross on the wall. But there were always whispers among us kids about that room. "Emma, don't go in there alone," my friend Lily had warned me once. "My brother says there's a ghost that prays in there at night." I remember rolling my eyes at her. That's so stupid. There's no such thing as ghosts. But the stories kept coming. Different kids had different versions. Some said it was an old pastor who died in the church. Others said it was a woman who used to clean the building. Nobody really knew, but everyone had heard something. One Sunday after service, I got curious enough to ask Pastor Mike about it. He was my favorite person at church, always gave me candy after the service, and remembered my birthday every year. He was this tall guy with glasses and graying hair who'd been at the church forever. "Pastor Mike," I asked while my mom was chatting with someone else, "is the prayer room downstairs haunted?" I expected him to laugh it off like adults usually do when kids ask about spooky stuff. Instead, he got this weird look on his face and knelt down to my level. "Well, Emma," he said quietly, "I don't know if haunted is the right word, but I'll tell you something I haven't told many people." He looked around to make sure no one was listening. "One night, years ago, I was working late in my office. I heard someone in that prayer room, so I went to check. I saw someone kneeling at the altar, but when I opened the door, there was nobody there." My eyes must have been huge, because he quickly added, "But don't worry, whatever, or whoever it is, they seem peaceful, just praying, nothing to be scared of." But that only made me more curious, and more scared too, if I'm being honest. A few weeks later came the annual church lock-in. It was this thing where all the kids in youth groups stayed overnight at the church with a few adult supervisors. We'd play games, watch movies, eat way too much pizza, and eventually crash on sleeping bags in the youth room. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks. That night started off normal enough. We played capture the flag in the parking lot until it got dark, then moved inside for board games and movies. By midnight, most of the younger kids were asleep. I pretended to be asleep too, lying in my purple sleeping bag near the edge of the youth room. Mrs. Wilson, one of the youth leaders, was sitting in a chair by the door reading a book, but I could tell she was getting sleepy. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was Pastor Mike's story, or maybe it was just that I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't scared. But once Mrs. Wilson dozed off, I slowly slipped out of my sleeping bag. I was still wearing my clothes, jeans, and my favorite green t-shirt with a butterfly on it. I had my sock feet so I wouldn't make noise on the tile floor. The church was so different at night. During the day, it was bright and full of people talking and laughing, but now it was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional snore from the youth room behind me. The hallway was almost completely dark, with just a little bit of moonlight coming through a window at the far end. As I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, I heard something. It was so faint I almost thought I imagined it, but then I heard it again, a whisper. It was coming from down the hall, from the direction of the prayer room. I should have turned around right then. I should have crawled back into my sleeping bag and pulled it over my head. But I didn't. Instead, I started walking toward the sound. The hallway seemed so much longer in the dark. I kept one hand on the wall to guide me, feeling the rough texture of the painted cinder blocks under my fingertips. The whispering got louder as I got closer to the prayer room, but I still couldn't make out what was being said. It sounded like someone praying, but in a language I didn't understand. When I reached the prayer room door, I stopped. The whispering was definitely coming from inside. I tried the handle, but it was locked. The door had this small window in it, about at my eye level. It was just a square of glass, maybe 6 inches across. I took a deep breath and looked through it. What I saw inside that room will stay with me forever. There was someone, or something, kneeling at the altar. Their back was to me, and they were bent forward like they were praying really intensely. But here's the thing that made my blood turn to ice. I could see through them. The moonlight coming through the window on the opposite wall was passing right through their body, casting a dim glow on the altar they were kneeling before. I jumped back from the door, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The whispering had stopped. Complete silence filled the hallway. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, my back pressed against the wall opposite the prayer room door. My mind was racing with thoughts like it's not real and I'm just tired and it's just my imagination. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. After what felt like forever, I gathered enough courage to look through the window again. I had to know if it was still there. I leaned forward slowly, my legs shaking, and peered through the glass. The room was empty, but somehow that was worse, because I knew it hadn't left through the door. I'd been standing right there the whole time, and there was no other way out of that room. That's when the real panic hit me. It wasn't in the room anymore, so where was it? Was it watching me? Was it right behind me? Was it going to grab me? I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. I sprinted down that dark hallway, not caring about the noise I was making. I slammed back into the youth room, dove into my sleeping bag and pulled it over my head. Mrs. Wilson stirred and asked if everything was okay, and I mumbled something about needing to use the bathroom. I didn't sleep a single minute that night. I lay there, sweating in my sleeping bag, convinced that at any moment that thing would come floating through the wall. Every creak of the building, every rustle as someone turned over in their sleep, sent a new wave of terror through me. The next morning, I was a wreck. My mom picked me up and commented on how tired I looked. I couldn't tell her what happened. I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? So I just said I hadn't slept well because Jacob had been snoring, which was true, but not the reason. For weeks afterward, I refused to go into the church basement. I made up excuses, stomach aches, headaches, anything to avoid going down there for Sunday school. My parents thought I was going through a phase. Eventually, I had to go back down, but I always made sure I was with a group, and I never ever went near that prayer room again. The strangest part came about a month later. I overheard my mom talking to another church member about how sad it was about Pastor Mike's heart attack. He had survived, thankfully, but would be taking several months off to recover. The thing is, according to what they were saying, he'd had the heart attack while praying alone in the church late at night, in that same prayer room. I don't go to Millfield Church anymore. My family moved to another town when I was 15, and we found a new church there. I've never told my parents why I was so relieved to leave that building behind. To this day, I don't know what I saw in that room. Was it a ghost, some kind of angel, or something else entirely? All I know is that it was real and it changed me. I'm 24 now and I still sleep with a nightlight. I still can't stand being alone in old buildings. And sometimes when I'm falling asleep at night, I swear I can hear that whispering again, just on the edge of my hearing. Words in a language I don't understand, spoken by something I can't see. I've tried researching the history of the church since then, looking for stories of deaths or strange occurrences that might explain what I saw. There are a few vague mentions of a caretaker who died there in the 1930s, and rumors about a secret prayer group that used to meet in the basement during Prohibition, but nothing concrete, nothing that explains what I experienced. Sometimes I think about contacting Pastor Mike to ask him more about his experience, but I never have. Part of me is afraid of what he might tell me. Part of me is afraid he'll confirm what I've suspected all these years, that whatever was in that room that night wasn't just passing through, it was a permanent resident, and it's still there, kneeling at that altar, whispering prayers that no living person was meant to hear.